Chapter 720. Su Zimo's gaze gradually fixated on a black-robed man in the crowd. The man looked very young and his face was chiseled. He had a cold expression and his eyes were as deep as the sea, making him unfathomable. The black-robed man was neither tall nor short and did not look burly. However, his body gave off a feeling of agility, and strength. There did not seem to be a single piece of flesh or bone on the man's body. The man stood motionlessly on the spot, seemingly relaxed. However, Su Zimo could vaguely sense that the man would react immediately at the slightest movement. It was extremely dangerous. Among the same cultivation realm, there were less than 5 cultivators that could give Su Zimo such a feeling, including the demon beasts. The black-robed man's gaze was calm as he met Su Zimo's gaze without fear. The glint in Su Zimo's eyes intensified. The black-robed man's gaze turned deeper as well. Their gazes collided in midair and the void was filled with a shuddering killing intent. Monkey and the others felt their hairs stand on end. Against that pressure, everyone held their breaths instinctively and kept quiet out of fear. Just as everyone was about to reach their limits, Su Zimo suddenly smiled and asked, "Night Spirit?" Finally, there was a slight change in the black-robed man's expression as well. He walked briskly to Su Zimo and pursed his lips without saying anything. However, his eyes were filled with emotions and longing. Ha 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 ha. Su Zimo burst into laughter and patted Night Spirit on the shoulder, nodding. "Thank you for taking care of Xiaoning all these years. It's my duty." Night Spirit spoke with a firm voice that was like metal. There was no trace of demonic chi from him and Su Zimo did not dare to recognize it at first. For ordinary demon beasts such as Monkey and the others, even if they were in the Jin Dan realm and could take on human form and speak in human tongue, it was inevitable that they would emit demonic chi. Cultivators could recognize it with a single glance after awakening their spirit eyes. If demons wanted to conceal their demonic chi completely, they would have to cultivate to the nascent soul realm and cultivate an essence spirit at the very least. The Night Spirit, on the other hand, had a mysterious background and a terrifying bloodline. He had probably awakened his inherited memories long ago. It was unknown what kind of secret technique he had inherited that allowed him to conceal his demonic aura in the Jin Dan realm. In other words, Night Spirit had blended into the crowd of cultivators and no one else had noticed him at all. "What? Your little Night Spirit?" Monkey came over in surprise and circled around Night Spirit. He muttered, "Not bad. Although this body is a little thin, it looks quite strong. You've changed so much. We can't even recognize you when you take human form." Linghu stared with his tiger-like eyes and also came forward. He sniffed Night Spirit's body and scratched here and there. "Little Night Spirit, do you still recognize me? I'm Little Crane. Back then, I gave you a lot of demon beast milk and even brought you out to play. You must be a picky eater again. Look at how skinny you've become." Ching Ching ran over as well and reached out with her slender hands, rubbing Night Spirit's cheeks gently. This originally cold face was actually rubbed into a strange appearance, making people not know whether to laugh or cry. Monkey could not hold it in as well and came forward to scratch him while grinning non-stop. There were a few claws that were roaming around Night Spirit's body. Night Spirit rolled his eyes helplessly. Su Zimo could not help but chuckle. Monkey, Linghu, and Little Crane had once accompanied Night Spirit as he grew up and hunted for him. Even if they were covered in injuries, they did not complain at all. If it was anyone else, they would have turned into a corpse before the other party could even get close, let alone touch Night Spirit. The 4 of them were delighted to be reunited after a long time and did not care about the gazes of others as they gathered together to play. Of course, Night Spirit preferred silence and basically did not move at all. Most of the time, Linghu and Ching Ching were the ones chattering happily. Little Fox stood at the side with a look of envy in her eyes. "Yes, he's indeed a brat. He's so easy to bully and has no temper. The golden lion's gaze lingered on Night Spirit as he thought to himself, I'll let him see what I'm capable of later on so that he'll back off and be the seventh obediently. Among the 7 of them, the golden lion had a noble bloodline and extraordinary combat strength. How did he end up at the last place and become the 7th brother? The golden lion was indignant. Right, suddenly, the spirit tiger recalled something and patted Night Spirit on the shoulder. Let me tell you something. The few of us have become sworn brothers and you're one of us as well. This is Big Brother, Linghu pointed to Su Zimo before pointing to Monkey. This is second brother. I, Hu Batian, am your 3rd brother. Ching Ching is your 4th sister and you're the 5th. Yes, Night Spirit was nonchalant about that. Even if they were not sworn brothers, Su Zimo and the others were his kin in his eyes. As for the rankings, he did not care about them at all. Aren't you old? You still have a 6th sister and 7th brother below you, Ching Ching chuckled. This is little Tanuki from the fox race. She's ranked 6th and is your 6th sister. You've got to take care of her in the future. Hello, Big Brother Night Spirit, the little fox called out obediently. Night Spirit nodded. He was cold by nature and knew nothing about little fox. The fact that he was nodding was already considered warm. You don't have to worry about her, Linghu waved his hand. Little Tanuki is on good terms with Big Brother. With Big Brother's protection, who can hurt her? Night Spirit's gaze shifted and he looked at Su Zimo and Little Fox. You're spouting nonsense again, Little Fox blushed and spat softly. Monkey pointed to the golden lion at the side and said, This is 7th brother from the golden lion race. He's your 7th brother. The golden lion strode over with a smile and greeted warmly, Brother Night Spirit, although this is the first time we're meeting, I feel like we've known each other for a long time. Why don't we go somewhere else to get closer? Alright, Night Spirit looked at the golden lion indifferently and nodded. Naturally, the golden lion's enmity could not be hidden from Night Spirit and he could take advantage of the situation as well. When Night Spirit agreed, the golden lion was delighted and shouted, Brother Night Spirit, follow me. The golden lion walked towards his cultivation chamber. Night Spirit followed closely behind. Monkey, Linghu, and Ching Ching pretended as though nothing was wrong and did not stop them, as though they were not bothered by what was happening. Su Zimo could not stand it any longer and coughed gently before whispering to Night Spirit, Be gentle, he's your 7th brother after all. Night Spirit nodded. Bam! The door of the cultivation chamber was shut and locked. Monkey, Linghu, and Ching Ching jumped up from where they were and glared at the cultivation chamber in the distance. Each of them was more excited than the other and gloated over the other's misfortune. Linghu said in a low voice, I'm guessing that stupid lion can last for 15 minutes. Ching Ching said, 100 breaths at most. Monkey said, 30 breaths. Boom. Before the 3 of them could finish their sentences, a deafening sound echoed from the cultivation chamber. The next moment, the door of the cultivation chamber was pushed open with a creak. Night Spirit walked out from inside with an indifferent expression. Behind him, the golden lion's entire body had sunk into the metal door of the cultivation chamber and was hanging on it. A human-shaped hole had been smashed into the thick iron door. The golden lion was dumbfounded and his eyes were dazed. Sparkling tears shimmered at the corners of his eyes and he had nothing left to live for. Chapter 721. Ha 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 ha. Upon seeing that, Monkey and the others could no longer hold it in as they clutched their stomachs and burst into laughter. That lasted for 3 breaths. I think he came out as soon as he entered. Golden Retriever, you're way too fast. Upon hearing the laughter of Monkey and the others, the golden lion finally realized that he had been made a fool of and glared at Monkey and the others with an extremely bitter expression. However, he could not blame others for something as such. After all, he was the one who sought them out. The golden lion looked at Night Spirit's back view with a deep sense of fear in its eyes. That man was way too terrifying. Just now, they had merely exchanged a single blow in the cultivation chamber and Night Spirit had suppressed him. Furthermore, the Golden Lion could clearly sense that if they were not sworn brothers, the one hanging on the metal door would be a cold corpse. How is that a brat? He's a complete devil. The Golden Lion wanted to cry, but no tears came out. Little Night Spirit, you've become so strong after more than 20 years. Ching Ching smiled brightly. When you were just born, you were only the size of a palm. You were so fierce and fun to play with. Night Spirit pursed his lips and smiled shyly. Ching Ching urged, hurry, transform into your true form and let me take a look at how much you've changed over the years. That's right. It's been a long time since I last saw you. I wonder how you look like now. Linghu mumbled as well. Back then, first checked many ancient books in order to find out about your background and race. However, he couldn't find any clues. Monkey looked at Night Spirit with anticipation as well, waiting for the latter to transform into his true form. Night Spirit lowered his head slightly with a hesitant expression, as though he was struggling internally and was in pain. Su Zimo's heart skipped a beat as he said indifferently, there's nothing much to see. He's about the same as when he was young. Don't make a fuss. In reality, Night Spirit had already grown significantly after devouring the dragon egg and his physique had changed significantly. Now that 20 years had passed, Su Zimo had no idea what Night Spirit had become. However, seeing how conflicted Night Spirit was, Su Zimo knew that he must have his own difficulties and did not want to make things too difficult for him. Night Spirit could tell that Su Zimo was trying to help him out, so he looked at him gratefully. Su Zimo surveyed his surroundings and changed the topic with a smile. Everyone, it's truly rare for us to reunite in the ancient battlefield today. Let's have a toast. The path of cultivation was long and Tianhuang mainland was boundless. Everyone was separated from each other. Not to mention 20 years, some people might not be able to see each other again after parting. Now that everyone had gathered here, the joy in their hearts could not be expressed in words. That's right. There's still 3 months to the phenomenon ranking and it's still early. Let's drink till we're drunk today. Ji Qingtian agreed loudly as well. We have wine to drink. Monkey licked his lips as his eyes lit up. In the blink of an eye, a month had passed. More and more cultivators gathered in Myriad Phenomenon City. Almost all the famous paragons and elites of the various major sects and factions had arrived in Myriad Phenomenon City. With the gathering of heroes, a storm was brewing. The arrival of every single peerless paragon would cause quite a stir in the city. For the past few days, Su Zimo had been staying in the main hall of Snowdrift Valley without taking a single step out. However, news spread one after another. Hang Qiuyu, the paragon of Sword Sect, had arrived in Myriad Phenomenon City. 20 years ago, the successors of the various super sects fought against Su Zimo beneath the human emperor's palace and some of them died while others were severely injured. There was no need to mention those who died. Some of the severely injured successors were unable to recover and some of them suffered such a huge setback and sank into oblivion. Of course, there were also a handful of people who broke out of their cocoons and were reborn. Hang Qiuyu was one of them. It was not only Hang Qiuyu. The fiend heir of Overlord Palace, Pang Yu, and monk Zhu Qin of Diamond Monastery had arrived in Myriad Phenomenon City a few days ago and caused a huge commotion. The 3 of them were the 3 most famous paragons in the past. Indeed, the 3 of them gave Su Zimo immense pressure in the battle beneath the human emperor's palace. As expected of the title of paragons, in the main hall of Snowdrift Valley, Su Zimo murmured softly and rubbed his fingertips gently. A spirit crane with information about the 3 of them turned into dust and vanished. There were many paragons who were defeated by Su Zimo back then, but the 3 of them were the only ones who managed to stand up again. Some things were clearly recorded in the spirit crane. The battle beneath the human emperor's palace 20 years ago dealt a huge blow to the 3 of them. That was also the reason why the 3 of them profited from their misfortune and rebuilt themselves. They obtained many opportunities and cultivated the legacy phenomenons of their sects, rising to become the number one of Jin Dan in their sects. Of course, apart from the three of them, Su Zimo had also noticed some relatively unfamiliar paragons over the past few days. The fiend heir of Shura sect, Ren Tu. It was said that he was the most terrifying successor of Shura sect after the current Shura, Yen Beichen. He was only slightly more than 100 years old after cultivating up till this point of time. However, his hands were stained with endless blood. Legend has it that this person was haunted by 3 million vengeful spirits and blood qi surged everywhere he passed, resembling an endless hell. Apart from Hang Qiuyu, Pang Yu, and Monk Ju Chen, Ren Tu was also a strong contender for the top 10 of the phenomenon ranking. Hollow Monastery, Monk Jian Kong. This successor cultivated the top ancient phenomenon of Hollow Monastery and the Buddhist monasteries, the seven-floored pagoda. A pagoda was a Buddhist pagoda. In the Buddhist monasteries, a seven-floored pagoda was the highest level of Buddhist pagoda. Since the ancient era, the successors of Hollow Monastery were almost at their limit to cultivate a six-floored pagoda. There were very few who could cultivate a seven-floored pagoda. In the end, all of them obtained the top of the phenomenon ranking and became the titular disciples of that generation. Now that monk Jian Kong had entered the ancient battlefield with a seven-floored pagoda, his intentions were clear. Of course, in everyone's hearts, although the seven-floored pagoda was strong, it was still inferior to the legacy phenomenon of the human emperor, Chaos Ocean. Above the main hall, perfected Lord Luo Shui frowned slightly. The fight for the phenomenon ranking this time round will most likely be extremely intense. If this was in the past, the appearance of many ancient phenomenons would almost guarantee the top spot. However, it's different this time round. For example, Ren Tu's Corpse Mountain Blood Sea and Monk Jian Kong's seven-floored pagoda were both in the list. In fact, many ancient phenomenons that have been lost in history have reappeared in this world. Even in the ancient era, a clash as such was extremely rare. Perfected Lord Luo Shui said deeply, "You have to be careful and cautious. Don't fight with Diyin for the sake of pride." Su Zimo had a calm expression and did not comment. After all, Diyin had been famous for a long time. In the fight for the Jin Dan phenomenon ranking 100 years ago, Diyin suppressed all the paragons domineeringly at the age of 30 and obtained the top spot. To many cultivators, although Su Zimo rose rapidly in recent years and his reputation was pushed to the peak by a few major battles, he was still inferior to Diyin at the end of the day. Right then, a figure sped over. Ji Qingtian entered the main hall and panted with a grim expression, saying slowly, "Diyin is here." In an instant, all the cultivators who had been meditating in the cultivation rooms in the main hall opened their eyes. Nobody could ignore that name. The entire myriad phenomenon city seemed to be in an uproar. End of chapter. Chapter 722. Su Zimo stood up with a bright gaze. Even he could not maintain his composure when he heard that name. 10 years ago, he had fought with Diyin at the bottom of the Dragon Burial Valley and both of them suffered light injuries. Furthermore, Diyin was the only person who could match him in melee combat without being defeated. He did not know how this person cultivated, what sort of opportunities or fortuitous encounters he had to be able to temper his physique to such a frightening level. Su Zimo was even more curious about how much this person had grown after 10 years. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. One after another, figures soared into the air. Everyone arrived at the top of the Grand Hall and looked down at Myriad Phenomenon City. Almost at the same time, figures rose from Myriad Phenomenon City one after another. Diyin's entry into the city was the center of attention. Roar. It was a deafening roar. A massive demon beast with a menacing expression rampaged through the streets fearlessly. The crowd at the front was shocked and retreated one after another. The demon beast had extremely long fur and resembled a tiger. It had a human face, tiger feet, pig fangs and a tail that was 1.8 feet long. For sharp horns that were incomparably sharp pointed into the skies. It was the primordial ferocious beast, the Tao Wu. There were many cultivators in Myriad Phenomenon City who rode on their spirit beasts. However, those spirit beasts were extremely obedient in the face of the Tao Wu and kept quiet out of fear. An ancient remnant beast at the front could not dodge in time and was devoured by the Tao Wu with blood splattering everywhere. The owner of the ancient remnant beast was frightfully pale as he grit his teeth. However, he could only bear with it and leave dejectedly. Fights between cultivators were prohibited in the city. However, there were no taboos for demon beasts to kill each other. This is a living being of the primordial era. It possesses frightening strength and is extremely ferocious. Out of nowhere, perfected Lord Luo Shui arrived behind everyone and said slowly. Su Zimo nodded. 10 years ago, the primordial ferocious beast suffered greatly in his hands. However, its physique was strong and it did not die even when Su Zimo slammed its head into the ground. Right now, the primordial ferocious beast was clearly even more frightening than it was 10 years ago. I'm not a match for him, the golden lion shook its head solemnly. Sensing Tao Wu's aura, Linghu took a deep breath and frowned. This big guy is a little tricky. The monkey did not say a word. He only curled his lips as if he was disdainful. He had an arrogant temperament. Even if he couldn't win, he would never admit defeat. Among everyone present, Night Spirit was the calmest. Night Spirit's eyes were gloomy as he watched Tao Wu rampaging through the city. His expression did not change at all and was as calm as water. The Swanee was already so terrifying. What kind of existence would be able to subdue this ancient ferocious beast? In Wanxiang City, countless gazes gradually froze on one person. A figure sat on the back of the primordial beast. This figure did not look old. He wore a purple Taoist robe and had sword-like eyebrows that reached his temples. His eyes were tightly shut and his expression was indifferent. His entire body exuded an aura that could dominate and suppress everything. The top of the previous phenomenon ranking, the number 1 perfected Jin Dan of Tianhuang Mainland, Diyin. After 100 years, Diyin returned to his old haunt as though he was the ruler of the world and no one could stop him. Seeing is better than hearing about him. This person is truly terrifying. Ji Qingtian's pupils constricted slightly as he shook his head and said dejectedly, I don't even have the courage to attack against this person. He subdued the enemy without a fight. The aura of a person was already so strong. He could affect the minds of cultivators of the same cultivation realm even from thousands of meters away. Right from the beginning, Diyin did not even open his eyes. Perhaps, he was resting with his eyes closed. Or perhaps, there was no one in Wanxiang City that could catch his eye. He merely sat on the Tao Wu casually and entered the city. However, such a simple action brought tremendous pressure to all the cultivators in Myriad Phenomenon City. Jining Jinjuan was no exception. Perfected Lord Luo Shui frowned slightly with a look of disbelief in her eyes as she murmured, that person is already this strong? A middle-aged cultivator followed closely behind Diyin. Perfected Lord Honey? Perfected Lord Luo Shui's eyes flickered as she said softly, to think that even he's here. Su Zimo's gaze shifted. Behind Diyin and perfected Lord Han Yi were Chaos Essence sect cultivators and Nia Hao who was defeated by Lin Xuanji was among them. All of a sudden. Su Zimo narrowed his gaze and fixed it on a cultivator from Chaos Essence sect. To be precise, it was a young monk. His hands were bound by a shimmering silver rope and his spirit energy was sealed as he was pushed forward. This young monk was none other than Ming Zhen who had parted ways with Su Zimo after entering the ancient battlefield. For the past few days, many cultivators had gathered in Wanxiang City but there was no news of Ming Zhen. Given Ming Zhen's capabilities, there were very few people in the ancient battlefield who could suppress him. Even if he could not win, Ming Zhen could escape far away. To think that he would encounter Diyin. There were a few wounds on Ming Zhen's body and his flesh was exposed. Pus flowed from his rotting flesh. It was clear that he had suffered a lot along the way. Su Zimo's gaze turned cold. At the bottom of the Dragon Burial Valley, Mingzhen chanted sutras and studied the Tao daily. He was far away from the chaos and strife and possessed a pure heart. Every time Su Zimo did not understand something, Mingzhen would answer it carefully without ever getting tired of it. In name, Mingzhen was his senior brother. However, Mingzhen was extremely young and Su Zimo had always viewed him as a younger brother. Now that he saw Mingzhen in such a state, Su Zimo's killing intent surged. Sensing something, Diyin opened his eyes suddenly. Initially, the sun was shining brightly in Wanxiang City. However, the moment Diyin opened his eyes, the temperature plummeted, as though a layer of darkness had shrouded him. Many cultivators in Wanxiang City shuddered uncontrollably as though their hearts were palpitating and their hairs stood on end. Diyin's senses were way too sharp. He had already sensed Su Zimo's hostility the moment it was released. Both of their gazes collided in midair. Ah, it's Su Zimo. One of them is the #1 perfected Jin Dan of the current era and the other is the legendary monster incarnate of history. The two of them are finally going to meet. Many cultivators whispered. Both of their auras rose continuously and neither of them was willing to back down. Suddenly, Su Zimo spoke with a thunderous voice and hollered, "Diyin, release him." Su Zimo had used a sound dermic formulation of the Buddhist monasteries with that voice and it had the effect of being deafening and enlightening. Many cultivators felt their hearts skip a beat. If they were weak-willed, they would have given in right away. Everyone was in an uproar. No one in Wanxiang City dared to speak to Diyin in that manner. Even Jining Jinjuan had to give him some face. That was because he could have advanced to nascent soul realm 100 years ago. The reason why he suppressed his cultivation and waited for this day was so that he could ascend the myriad phenomenon peak once more and leave his name on the ancient phenomenon stele. Furthermore, as long as he advanced to nascent soul realm, he would definitely be the top Jining Jinjuan and could suppress almost all the perfected lords in the ancient battlefield. Nobody expected that the two of them would be at odds the moment they met. Furthermore, Su Zimo's words seemed to imply something else. Chapter 723. Boom! Su Zimo descended from the skies like a meteor. He streaked across the sky and landed heavily on the long street, blocking everyone from Chaos Essence Sect. The blue stone beneath his feet instantly shattered. Cracks appeared and spread in all directions. Dust billowed. Bang! 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 Little Fatty, Shijian, Monkey and the others descended one after another and the entire ground shook. No matter what, they would stand by Su Zimo's side unconditionally. When Mingzhen caught sight of Su Zimo, he was invigorated and looked emotional as well. Diyin sat on the back of the Tao Wu and looked down at Su Zimo who was not far away with a fake smile. Nye Hao stood out and pointed at Su Zimo, hollering, "Who do you think you are to speak to senior brother D in that manner?" Humph. Little Fatty refused to back down and sneered, "Who do you think you are to bark here?" You, before Nye Hao could finish, he was interrupted by Little Fatty. I wonder who was the one who provoked someone else and ended up being chased and beaten up like a stray dog. How embarrassing. Ha 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 ha. Monkey and the others burst into laughter. There was no way Nye Hao was a match for Little Fatty's mouth. He was referring to the incident where Nye Hao was taught a lesson by Lin Xuanji outside the astral dragon sputum lair. That was indeed Nye Hao's sore spot but he could not refute it. Nye Hao's face flushed red when he sensed the scorching gazes around him. However, he could not say anything and could only grit his teeth hatefully. Diyin, I'll repeat myself, Su Zimo raised his head slightly and said slowly with a cold gaze, "Let him go." Diyin's expression was calm and he was unmoved. However, the mockery in his eyes intensified. Su Zimo, don't be rash. Perfected Lord Luo Shui's voice sounded in his mind. Cultivators are prohibited from fighting and killing in the city. Now, the commotion has alarmed practically everyone. If you act rashly under the gazes of everyone, then you'll surely draw a boundless killing intent. Su Zimo was clear in his heart. This was not an exaggeration, but a fact. If he violated the rules of Myriad Phenomenon City, even perfected Lord Luo Shui would not be able to protect him. However, there was no way he could sit back and watch Mingzhen fall into Di Yin's hands. Su Zimo, do you remember what I told you? Di Yin said slowly, I warned you not to come to the ancient battlefield or you'll definitely die here. As soon as he finished speaking, the crowd stirred up quite a commotion. From the sound of it, the two of them seemed to know each other. Looks like there's a grudge between them. This is going to be interesting. Su Zimo said coldly, back then, I was the one who injured this beast under you. It has nothing to do with others. If you have any tricks up your sleeve, feel free to use them on me. I'll take them all. Hee, interesting. Di Yin chuckled. If you want me to release him, you'll have to have some bargaining chips. What do you want? Your right hand. Instantly, Myriad Phenomenon City fell silent. Su Zimo's right hand was the legendary divine phoenix bone. That was an utmost treasure of the universe. A legendary divine item. It was a treasure that no connate spirit weapons or even connate dermic weapons could compare to. Fu. Suddenly, Su Zimo laughed and said indifferently, Di Yin, you're afraid. Me? Afraid of you? Di Yin seemed as though he had heard the greatest joke in the world. Su Zimo shook his head. You want to leave your name on the ancient phenomenon steel and fight for the top of the phenomenon ranking. However, you're already afraid. You don't even have the courage to fight me. Humph. The Tao Wu glared at Su Zimo with endless hatred in his eyes. Back at the bottom of the Dragon Burial Valley, he was nearly killed by a single palm strike from Su Zimo. That was the greatest humiliation of his life. For the past 10 years, with the help of Di Yin, he had obtained many opportunities and fortuitous encounters as well. His strength had risen to another level and his confidence had skyrocketed. With a ferocious glint, the Tao Wu dug his feet into the ground and grit his teeth. You'll have to get through me if you want to fight my master. You think you're worthy? Su Zimo glared and hollered, scram. It was deafening like a thunderclap. A massive air current gushed out of Su Zimo's mouth, almost forming a gust of wind. Caught off guard, the Tao Wu shuddered and felt his ears buzz. Swept by the gust of wind, he lost his footing and retreated involuntarily. Frowning slightly, he lowered his body and froze the Tao Wu in place. The Tao Wu shook his head and gradually regained his senses. Stabilizing himself, the hatred in his eyes intensified. The crowd was in an uproar. The Tao Wu was one of the strongest and most terrifying primordial ferocious beasts. Although there were more than 100,000 paragons in Myriad Phenomenon City, there were probably less than 100 of them who could take down this primordial ferocious beast. Nobody expected that such a ferocious beast would be pushed back by Su Zimo and almost be flipped over. The Tao Wu was enraged. Even though he was a demonic beast, under the watchful eyes of so many people, such a situation occurred. He felt that he could not hold his face, and there was a ball of anger in his heart that he had nowhere to vent. The Tao Wu was easily angered and was the most ferocious. At that moment, only fresh blood could extinguish the anger in its heart. Looking at the few demon beasts in human form behind Su Zimo, the Tao Wu's eyes shifted as though he had thought of something. Ow! Ow! The Tao Wu roared hurriedly. Di Yin understood and nodded. Su Zimo, I'll give you another chance. You can send a spirit beast to fight the Tao Wu. If you can defeat it, I'll let you go. If you lose, I don't want your right hand first. Hand over the purple thunder manual you obtained. Su Zimo furrowed his brows slightly. What a good plan. There are many spirit beasts in the city, but which one of them is a match for the Tao Wu? Fufu, although Monkey was strong previously, he was definitely not a match for the Tao Wu. On the surface, it's giving Su Zimo a chance. However, in reality, it's a dead end. The surrounding cultivators discussed fervently. Behind Su Zimo, Linghu, Qing Qing, the Golden Lion and Little Fox were silent. Linghu whispered, "If I had more time to cultivate, I might be able to give this Tao Wu a try. However, I can't defeat it right now." "I'll do it." Monkey stood out. To be fair, he didn't have much confidence that he would be able to deal with this enraged by *ch. However, if he entered a berserk state and triggered the mysterious power in his bloodline, he might be able to fight the Tao Wu to the death. Su Zimo was a little hesitant. This might be his only chance to save Mingzhen. He could not afford to lose. Losing the Purple Thunder Manual was a small matter. However, Monkey's life might be in danger if he lost. "Let me do it." Right then, a calm voice sounded from behind Su Zimo. When he heard that voice, Su Zimo's heart skipped a beat and he relaxed instantly. Night Spirit. He nearly forgot about him. "Su Zimo, do you agree or not?" At that moment, Diyin asked. "All right." Su Zimo no longer hesitated and agreed immediately. "Great." Diyin smiled gently. "Since it's a fight between spirit beasts, let's not interfere. Let them fight to their heart's content until one of them dies." "Are you sure?" Su Zimo raised his brow slightly. Diyin declared proudly, "A gentleman keeps his word. There's another chapter later." "It's late, don't wait anymore." End of chapter. Chapter 724. Go on, give it your all. Su Zimo did not have anything to instruct Night Spirit. The commotion here was huge enough. Almost all the cultivators in Myriad Phenomenon City were alarmed. Although Jining Jinjuan of the various major sects and factions had yet to appear, Su Zimo was certain that they were watching everything from the shadows. In front of everyone, Su Zimo was not worried that Diyin would go back on his word. Night Spirit strode out slowly from behind Su Zimo. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. Instantly, countless gazes landed on Night Spirit. A look of surprise appeared on the faces of many cultivators. What sort of demon beast is that? It looks so frail and weak. It's probably not even enough to fill the gaps between the Tao Wu's teeth. Su Zimo has already given up. Compared to the massive and majestic Tao Wu, Night Spirit looked as insignificant as an ant at that moment. The Tao Wu could crush him to death with a single stomp. Furthermore, Night Spirit was so inconspicuous that nobody noticed him earlier on. He was way too ordinary. Even the demonic chi around him was only a faint wisp that seemed like it could be blown away by a gust of wind. Diyin narrowed his gaze and glared at Night Spirit for a long time. The black-robed man looked truly ordinary. However, for some reason, Diyin's heart skipped a beat for no reason. He glanced sideways and asked softly, "Elder Hun Yi, can you tell what the background of that beast is?" Perfected Lord Hun Yi shook his head. "I can't tell." After pausing for a moment, he continued, "However, even pure-blooded ferocious beasts won't be a match for the Tao Wu." Diyin nodded as well. "Yes, he has a wisp of essence blood of the primordial Tao Wu in his body and his physique has been raised to a frightening level. He can even fight against the primordial 9 races. Be careful." Diyin patted the Tao Wu beneath him and floated into the air. "Don't worry, Master." Lao Ai said with a murderous look, "I will definitely bite off this little guy's head and chew it bit by bit." Whoosh! With a shake of his body, Tao Wu's huge body disappeared. He actually transformed into his human form and stood in front of Night Spirit. His eyes were full of ridicule. "Little fellow, you'd better revert to your original form. Otherwise, you won't have a chance later." Bai and chuckled and said, "As for me, I only need this human body to tear you apart." Everyone knew that demonic beasts could transform into human form, but only when demonic beasts reverted to their original form could they unleash their full strength. Now, Tao Wu had transformed into his human form and allowed the night spirit to transform into his true form. His contempt and disdain were obvious. However, everyone felt that it was only natural. Moreover, in the hearts of the crowd, even if this ordinary black-clothed man reverted to his original form, he would not be able to escape death. Perhaps, he would only be able to struggle a little longer. When he heard Tao Wu's mockery, Night Spirit remained expressionless, and his eyes suddenly turned dark. The temperature of the entire void plunged. A murderous intent that caused one's heart to tremble appeared. Swash! Night Spirit moved. In the blink of an eye, his figure vanished from the spot. Su Zimo's eyes lit up. Even after 20 years, Night Spirit had not changed at all. The killing aura from his body was pure and cold. The moment he attacked, it burst forth instantly like an endless night that sent one into despair. Tao Wu reverted to his human form. Night Spirit would not mock or joke around. In fact, it would not even have the thought of having an unfair advantage. For him, this was an opportunity. Night Spirit's mind was only filled with thoughts of how he could kill his opponent faster and more effectively. A black figure flashed by like a phantom. By the time Tao Wu reacted to it, Night Spirit had already appeared beside him. It was too fast. The speed, timing and angle of the attack left Su Zimo in awe. His expression changed starkly. How sharp was his foresight! A single action from Night Spirit and he had already realized that Tao Wu was in trouble. Night Spirit reached out and spread his fingers, grabbing towards Tao Wu's side viciously. Groar! Tao Wu was scared out of his wits. When he saw that it was too late to dodge, he could not help but roar. His tendons and bones rang together and his blood chi burst forth. His body expanded and he reverted to his true form right away. That was a wise choice. If he wanted to dodge or was a step slower, he would have been a corpse by now. Layers of thick, long hair covered by Wu's body. The fur was shiny and shiny, resembling fine steel wires. Layer after layer, even supreme-grade spirit weapons could not cut through them. There was no way they could hurt the flesh within. Exclamation point. A flash of blood appeared. Night Spirit's grab tore through Tao Wu's defenses instantly and tore off a piece of flesh from his massive body. Groar! Tao Wu cried out in pain and his body shuddered. Thankfully, he reacted in time. After reverting to his true form, his body expanded and his flesh became thicker. Because of that, Night Spirit's attack deviated and his tendons and bones were not injured. If he was a step slower, Night Spirit's grab would have ripped his stomach apart. A wave of exclamations sounded from the crowd. That scene was truly beyond everyone's expectations. Nobody expected that the primordial ferocious beast, Tao Wu, would be injured the moment they exchanged blows. Roar! Tao Wu roared and twisted his body. Shaking his massive head, he raised the 4 sharp horns on his head and stabbed towards Night Spirit fiercely. His blood surged, and the 4 horns turned incomparably red, as if they were burning red spears. Streams of blood chi spewed out one after another. Demonic chi surged. Many cultivators had grim expressions and were secretly shocked. The power released by Tao Wu could even break through the Jin Dan phenomenon of most cultivators present. Night Spirit's gaze was cold and he did not take the 4 incoming horns head-on. Night Spirit's body swayed and became light as a feather. Pressing his palm against the sharp horns, he took advantage of the momentum and arrived above Tao Wu's head. Tao Wu's expression changed. Night Spirit did not give him a chance to react at all as he raised his fist and hammered down heavily on Tao Wu's head. Boom! There was a deafening sound. Crack! 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 The jarring sound of bones cracking could be heard. When they heard that sound, all the cultivators present felt their scalps prickle and their hairs stand on end. It was way too ruthless. As a primordial ferocious beast, Tao Wu's bones were probably even tougher than perfect spirit weapons. But now, they were shattered by Night Spirit with a single punch. Ah! It was no wonder why Tao Wu was a primordial ferocious beast. Even though its brain juice was seeping out, its body was bursting with immense life force. Tao Wu's eyes were bloodshot and his blood qi had already surged into his mind. Reaching out with his massive palm, he grabbed towards Night Spirit in a frenzy. After the punch landed, Night Spirit's figure had already vanished. Like a ghost, a shadow slid down the gap between Tao Wu's neck and stopped below. Attack! From the moment he leaped onto Tao Wu's head to the moment he arrived at Tao Wu's throat, the entire process was smooth without any sluggishness. It was clean and tidy. Night Spirit reached out with his palm and pierced the Tao Wu's throat like a sharp blade. When he retracted his palm, it was stained with blood. It was as though he was grabbing onto a gigantic anaconda that was twitching wildly in his palm, dripping with blood and steaming hot air. Its throat was shattered and Tao Wu's windpipe was ripped out by Night Spirit. It was way too savage. Pust! Pust! Gasps could be heard from the surroundings. Chapter 725. Boom! The Tao Wu's massive body could no longer hold on and fell to the ground heavily. Dust flew everywhere and streams of glaring blood flowed beneath its body. It was over. The Tao Wu's head was shattered and its brain oozed out. Even its trachea was ripped out and its life force was completely severed, even an immortal would not be able to save it. Night Spirit stood silently at the side with an extremely calm expression despite being stained with blood. It was as though he had not killed a primordial ferocious beast, but an ant. The entire process happened way too quickly. It was especially so for Night Spirit's final 2 killing moves. Even perfected Lord Hun Yi could not react in time, let alone perfected being Jin Dan. What was even more shocking was that Night Spirit did not revert to his true form the entire time. This meant that Night Spirit did not use his full strength at all. Up till now, nobody knew what Night Spirit's true form looked like or what race he was from. Dian looked at the Tao Wu that was on its last breaths and remained silent with a frighteningly dark expression. Beast, how dare you? Kill him. Many Chaos Essence sect cultivators were enraged and hollered. Some of them even summoned flying swords from their storage bags. Su Zimo shielded Night Spirit behind him and glared at Dian with a burning gaze. Dian was the one who suggested the bet. He could only admit defeat in front of everyone. As the number 1 of the previous Jin Dan phenomenon ranking and the number 1 Jin Dan perfected being, Dian's reputation would be ruined the moment he went back on his word. This was truly akin to swallowing his pride. He could only endure the death of his spirit beast. Dian raised his hand gently. With just this one move, the air in the entire area seemed to have solidified, and the pressure in everyone's hearts increased greatly. Chaos Essence sect's initially noisy cultivators shut their mouths instantly. The long street was completely silent. Even though he was slightly defeated, he was still the number 1 perfected being who ruled over the world and could suppress everything with a flip of his palm. Release him. Dian was expressionless as he spoke slowly. It was only 2 words, but the Hunyuan sect cultivators behind him did not dare to disobey. They obediently untied the silver rope around Mingzhen and released him. Mingzhen staggered and Su Zimo hurriedly went up to him. Zimo, thank you. Su Zimo had already returned to the secular world, so it was impossible for Mingzhen to call him junior brother. Moreover, the relationship between the 2 of them was considered a secret, and outsiders did not know about it. Mingzhen lowered his head. Because of him, he had implicated Su Zimo. This inexperienced little monk felt guilty. Su Zimo did not say much and merely patted Mingzhen's shoulder gently. Retrieving a few bottles of elixirs from his storage bag, he handed them over and said softly, "Take these elixirs first to stabilize your injuries." Ming Zhen nodded and took it. Di stood in the air and his gaze landed on Su Zimo and Night Spirit. It was bone-chilling. Di did not conceal the killing intent in his heart at all. Everyone could sense that Di was truly enraged at that moment. "Su Zimo, you've won this round." After a suffocating silence, Di finally spoke slowly, "However, I'll use your blood as a sacrifice to my spirit beast. You, and you," extending his finger, he pointed at everyone around Su Zimo and said word by word, "All of you will be buried with him. None of you will be able to escape." Many cultivators looked at Su Zimo and the others with pitiful gazes. It had to be said that it was a tragedy to be targeted by such a terrifying existence. Tisk. Monkey spat in Di Yin's direction with a look of disdain. Ha! Little Fatty was an optimistic person by nature as he chuckled and pouted his lips. Di, you're strong and I'm not your match. However, there are rules in Myriad Phenomenon City. You can't possibly lay your hands on me, right? From this day forth, I'm going to stay in the city and not leave. Who's afraid of who? Cultivators were forbidden from fighting privately in Myriad Phenomenon City. Even if Di had a torrential hatred, he could not attack. Di Yin's expression was unchanged as he said indifferently, "It's fine. What I said today still counts. You'll leave the city eventually. No matter where you guys are in the future, I'll hunt you down regardless of where you are. I won't rest until I'm dead." The moment he said that, the void was filled with a murderous aura. Let alone Fatty and his crew, even the cultivators who were watching the battle felt their hearts trembling in fear. They would not be able to have peace from now on if they were targeted by such a terrifying person. They might not even be able to have a peaceful night's sleep. Nobody doubted Di Yin's capabilities. Throughout history, he was the only monster incarnate who obtained the legacy phenomenon of the human emperor. If a perfected Jin Dan as such were to leave the ancient battlefield and enter the nascent soul realm, he would most likely be invincible within the nascent soul realm. At that time, nobody of the same cultivation realm would be able to stop him. With that said, Di moved and headed into the distance without looking at Su Zimo and the others. "In that case, I'll definitely have to kill you." Right then, a calm voice sounded. However, it was earth-shattering. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. Countless gazes of disbelief landed on Su Zimo. Despite Di Yin's domineering words and threats, Su Zimo was still able to say such words and was not weaker in terms of aura. Su Zimo did not conceal his killing intent either as he pointed it at Di Yin. "You're going to kill me?" Di Yin's figure froze as though he had heard the greatest joke in the world. He shook his head and chuckled with a mocking gaze. "That's right," Su Zimo's tone was firm as he said slowly, "If I want to kill you, I don't have to go to Bai Luo or Acheron. I'll do it right here in Myriad Phenomenon City." Di Yin threatened Little Fatty and the others. Su Zimo was going to eliminate this threat beforehand. Everyone was stunned. Fighting was prohibited in Myriad Phenomenon City and there was no chance for the two of them to fight. How could Su Zimo kill Di Yin? Di Yin's thoughts shifted and he understood what Su Zimo meant. "You can kill me if you want," he sneered, "I'll be waiting for you at the peak of the Myriad Phenomenon peak. We'll talk after you're qualified to come up." Everyone was enlightened. This was the only chance for the two of them to fight. As long as the two of them were on the same stone step, they would fight under the auspices of Enigma Palace to determine the final ranking of the phenomenon ranking. Frog in a well, you don't even know who you're challenging. By the time the voice sounded, Di Yin had already vanished at the end of the long street. Although Su Zimo is the strongest monster incarnate in history, isn't he a little too arrogant? The Myriad Phenomenon peak isn't that easy to ascend. That's right. 100 years ago, Di Yin stopped at the 100th step as well. We don't even know if this man can defeat Diin in terms of strength, and yet he dares to threaten to kill the other party. That's laughable and ignorant. The stronger the paragon, the smaller the difference in strength. It's already rare for him to be able to defeat the other party, let alone kill the other party. He didn't even manage to kill Su Cheng of Zephyr Thunder Palace. How is he going to kill Diin? What wishful thinking. The surrounding cultivators gradually dispersed and some discussions could be heard. Su Zimo merely smiled indifferently towards those voices. No matter what, he had resolved one of his worries after saving Ming Zhen today. As for his feud with Diin, it would naturally be revealed in the fight for the phenomenon ranking 2 months later. Chapter 726. Su Zimo's group returned to the main hall of Snowdrift Valley. Along the way, they had a rough idea of Ming Zhen's experiences for the past few days. As Su Zimo had expected, although the two of them were separated, Ming Zhen's cultivation was solid and he had made up for his lack of combat experience in the past few years as well. Along the way, although they were obstructed by many ferocious beasts and ancient living beings, they managed to get through without any mishaps. Ming Zhen was dressed plainly as a monk. When he saw a commotion, he merely chanted a Buddhist proclamation softly before hiding far away. He was truly pure and had no desires. Most cultivators would not take the initiative to attack him. During this period of time, Ming Zhen could not stand by idly when he saw cultivators humiliating female cultivators. As such, he took the initiative to attack once and injured someone from the fiend sections. After hearing Ming Zhen's description, Su Zimo understood. That fiend sect cultivator was not a nobody either. If he was not wrong, he should be the fiend heir of Cloud Rain sect of the 7 fiend sects, Shengguanyu. He could be considered as an acquaintance as well. Back at the human emperor's palace, Shengguanyu was nearly killed by Su Zimo and escaped with severe injuries. To think that this person would have arrived at the intermediate ancient battlefield after 20 years as well. Cloud Rain sect's methods emphasized on pursuing the primitive Tao and breaking free from the shackles of men and women. They removed the shackles of their bodies and spirits, allowing the clouds to summon rain, yin and yang to fuse and harmonize with heaven and earth. Unfortunately, Shengguanyu met Ming Zhen. Ming Zhen had a pure heart and chanted sutras and Buddhism all year round. He comprehended the Tao and his mind was pure and flawless. Even if Demoness Ji and Little Fox attacked together, they would not be able to shake his Tao heart, let alone Cloud Rain sect. Not long after, Ming Zhen met Diin. Back then, the two of them had a conflict at the bottom of the Dragon Burial Valley and there was naturally no way Diin would let him off. In front of Diin, Ming Zhen was still inexperienced. Before Jin Dan could release his phenomenon, he was captured alive by Diin. Jin Dan's fight for the phenomenon ranking is in 2 months' time. Recuperate well first. After settling Ming Zhen down, Su Zimo retreated and looked at a cultivation room not far away with a worried expression, sighing gently. These days, Ning locks herself in the room and gets thinner and thinner. She refuses to come out. Su Zimo didn't know how to persuade him. The more attached one was to the world of mortals, the harder it was to cut them off. The more the saber slashed down, the more painful it was. No one can help Ning. She can only rely on herself. What's more, Su Zimo was also under tremendous pressure. It wasn't just because of Diin. There were also many hostile super sects in Wanxiang City. For example, the Zephyr Thunder Palace was bent on obtaining the Purple Thunder incantation and would definitely not let him off. Now, other than the Zephyr Thunder Palace, Clear Wind Temple, and Purple Firmament sect joining forces to test him when he first entered the city, there was no other movement after that. Su Zimo believed that these super sects would absolutely not let this matter rest. Within Wanxiang City, Jining Jinjuan could attack without restraint. This unknowingly added many more variables. Not only that. Su Zimo was still thinking about something else. Nian Qi's whereabouts. However, there was an even more terrifying faction behind Nian Qi, the Protoss. Even perfected Lord Luo Shui's expression changed starkly at the mention of the Protoss. What were the Protoss's intentions for appearing in the ancient battlefield? There was also Night Spirit. Night Spirit did not reveal his true form the entire time. Even when he fought against the Tao Wu, he merely fought in his human form. On one hand, it could be understood that Night Spirit did not need to revert to his true form to kill the Tao Wu. On the other hand, it could also be understood that Night Spirit had reservations. There were many signs that caused Su Zimo to lean towards the latter. However, what was Night Spirit worried about? Would there be trouble if he reverted to his true form? The combination of many things caused Su Zimo's heart to feel heavy. Ever since Night Spirit killed the Tao Wu, Myriad Phenomenon City entered a state of peace. However, as time passed by, the atmosphere in the city turned increasingly oppressive and stifling, as though it was the eve of a storm. A storm was brewing. Another 15 days passed. A piece of news finally broke the peace of Myriad Phenomenon City. The fight for the Jean Dan Phenomenon ranking would officially begin 3 days later. This was a full month and a half earlier than the usual time. Many cultivators discussed fervently, but nobody knew the reason. Morning, 3 days later. The morning sun had just risen and figures streaked through the city, heading straight for the Myriad Phenomenon peak. A grand event as such happened once every 100 years, even if they did not participate, nobody would miss it. Su Zimo and the others gathered in the main hall of Snowdrift Valley and were prepared to set off. With a creak, the door of another cultivation chamber opened. Everyone turned towards the sound. Unexpectedly, Xiaoning walked out as well. This was the first time Xiaoning had left her cultivation chamber in the past few days. After not seeing her for a long time, her face was a little pale and her figure was much thinner. But now, she seemed to have sensed something and there was a hint of vitality in her eyes. Xiaoning. Su Zimo's voice was gentle, as though he was afraid of disturbing her. Xiaoning smiled gently. Brother, I'm fine. When he saw Xiaoning's smile, Su Zimo heaved a sigh of relief and felt relieved. Sister Xiaoning, it's good that you're fine. Young master and all of us have been thinking about you for the past few days, hoping that you'll recover quickly. Little Fox closed in and hugged Xiaoning's arm gently. Little Fatty, Leng Ro, Ji Qingtian and the others had heartened expressions and encouragement in their eyes. Xiaoning's eyes were slightly red as she bowed deeply to everyone. I've made everyone worry for the past few days. It's good that you've overcome this hurdle, Ji Qingtian said gently. Now that your old friends are gone, you have to cherish those around you so that you won't have any more regrets. To be fair, the sibling relationship between Su Zimo and Xiaoning was something that everyone envied. Up till this point of their cultivation, their closest kin had already left and they had severed all ties with the mortal world. This sibling relationship was extremely rare in the cruel world of cultivators. Let's go. Today, we'll ascend the ancient path once more and meet the heroes of the world. Su Zimo was in a great mood when he saw that Xiaoning was fine. Waving his hand, he led everyone away from Snowdrift Valley and towards the Myriad Phenomenon Peak. The Myriad Phenomenon Peak was 18,000 feet tall and its peak pierced into the clouds. It was difficult to see. The entire mountain peak was majestic and ancient. For countless years, it had witnessed the rise and fall of countless paragons and witnessed the rise and fall of history. Any cultivator would seem incomparably insignificant beneath this mountain peak. The cultivators in Midair sped towards the Myriad Phenomenon Peak in a dense pack. The fight for the phenomenon ranking this time round was going to be extremely intense. Of the 9 immortal sects, apart from Glass Palace which was destroyed by Su Zimo, the paragons of the other 8 sects were all present. Some had fluttering sleeves, some were elegant, some were pure and some moved with the wind. Of the 7 fiend sects, the fiend heir of Hidden Death sect was killed by Su Zimo and the paragons of the other 6 sects had all arrived. Some had a torrential malevolent aura, some were filled with a sea of blood, some were enchanting and some were ferocious. Of the 6 Buddhist monasteries, the paragons of Dipamkara Monastery were present and the paragons of the other 5 monasteries were all present. They were either dignified, ferocious, emotionless or shimmering with Buddhist light. Chapter 727. Before long, a dense crowd of cultivators gathered around the myriad phenomenon peak. At a single glance, there were at least 100,000 people in the black mass. Among the many cultivators, Su Zimo caught sight of a few familiar faces. The first to notice him was Chaos Essence Sect's Diin. No matter where this person went, he shone brightly. Their gazes collided in midair, and sparks flew in all directions. Diin sneered and turned around. Apart from Diin, Su Cheng of Zephyr Thunder Palace was among them as well. Su Cheng's expression was dark as he glared coldly at Su Zimo and harumphed. Wu Feng of Purple Firmament Sect and Duan Qingping of Clear Wind Temple were among them. After 20 years, Sword Sect's Heng Qiuyu's aura had turned sharper and sharper than before. Even his eyes shone with a blinding sword beam. Heng Qiuyu was extremely hostile towards Su Zimo as well. Sensing something, Su Zimo shifted his gaze and caught sight of another person. That person was dressed in black and had black hair. His expression was blank, expressionless and pale. Wielding a sheathed sword, he advanced silently through the crowd. He was not fast. It was more like he was pacing, step by step. That person did not have any followers or fellow sect mates, he merely had a sword in his hand and advanced alone. The reason why he could sense this person's presence in the vast crowd was because he was the only one whose sharpness could match Heng Qiuyu. If Heng Qiuyu's sharpness was exposed, this person's sharpness was reserved. Dugu Jian. He was a member of the Dugu clan, one of the 4 gentry clans of the North region. Back when they were fighting for the vermilion fruit in the Great Qian ruins, the two of them did not know each other. However, this person had once helped Su Zimo cripple the successor of Heavenly Piercing Sword Sect. As though he sensed Su Zimo's gaze, Dugu Jian paused in his tracks and looked over. Su Zimo smiled gently and nodded in acknowledgement. Dugu Jian was expressionless and his eyes seemed to ripple for a moment before disappearing. He retracted his gaze and continued towards the myriad phenomenon peak. Among the fiend sects, other than the most infamous Shura sects Rintu, Overlord Palace's Pang Yu was also rather eye-catching. Pang Yu was at least a head taller than the other cultivators. Carrying a gigantic black spear on his shoulder, he strode forward with a ferocious gaze that was filled with malice. Before long, Pang Yu caught sight of Su Zimo as well. Unexpectedly, Pang Yu did not have any enmity towards Su Zimo. In fact, he even cupped his fists towards Su Zimo from afar and grinned. Su Zimo also cupped his fists in return. Apart from the geniuses, the most eye-catching things around the myriad phenomenon peak were the 16 clouds floating in midair. There was a cultivator seated cross-legged on every single cloud, exuding a shuddering aura. A total of 16 Jining Jinjuan. Through their attire and the sect badges on their waists, it was easy to distinguish the origins of the 16 Jining Jinjuan. Among the 9 immortal sects, apart from Glass Palace, Jining Jinjuan came from Heavenly Dipper Sect, Snowdrift Valley, Purple Firmament Sect, Chaos Essence Sect, Clear Wind Temple, Zephyr Thunder Palace, Sword Sect and Soaring Feather Sect. It was clear that the 8 clouds were closer to each other. Among them was perfected Lord Luo Shui. As for the 7 fiend sects, only 2 Jining Jinjuan came from Shura Sect and Overlord Palace. Of the 6 Buddhist monasteries, apart from Dipamkara Monastery, Jining Jinjuan came from Diamond Monastery, Hollow Monastery, Formless Monastery, Wisdom Monastery and Clear Heart Nunnery. There were 15 Jining Jinjuan from the immortal, Buddhist and fiend sections. On the 16th cloud sat a cultivator in grey Taoist robes. His sleeves fluttered and he held a feather fan in his hand, exuding an indescribable elegance. Su Zimo shifted his gaze to Lin Xuanji, who was not far away. This is perfected Lord Yujun of Enigma Palace. His cultivation is unfathomable, and he's also the host of the Jin Dan phenomenon ranking this time round. At this moment, a gentle voice sounded. A fragrance wafted over and a beautiful girl appeared beside Su Zimo. She wore a long pink dress and had bright eyes. She looked innocent, as though she was even younger than the little fox. Little Fatty and the others were shocked and dodged one after another, not daring to look at her with wary expressions. Although the girl looked harmless, she was the pure maiden of the fiend's sex who could bewitch all living beings. Even women would fall for her charms if they were not careful, let alone men. Su Zimo glanced sideways and smiled. You're here too. Of course, how can I miss out on such a lively scene? Demoness Ji snickered. Even without her relationship with Ji Yaoshue, the two of them would not be too distant. Back at the human emperor's palace, when the paragons of the immortal, Buddhist and fiend sects surrounded Su Zimo, this girl was the only one who stood by his side without hesitation. Su Zimo was not going to care about the so-called tripod. Even under those circumstances, Demoness Ji chose to stand by his side. Even if he was a furnace, Su Zimo would accept it. He did not have many friends. No matter how he looked at it, Demoness Ji was one of them. The impact of the battle beneath the human emperor's palace 20 years ago was way too great. Demoness Ji sighed and raised her chin. Although the fight for the phenomenon ranking was intense previously, there shouldn't have been so many famous Jining Jinjuan spectators. Everything has to do with you. Oh. Su Zimo was surprised. Initially, he thought that it was normal for Jining Jinjuan to arrive in Myriad Phenomenon City. Demoness Ji looked at the 16 clouds in midair. The Jining Jinjuan seated on them are not sealers with declining blood qi and nearing the end of their lifespans. Su Zimo could tell that as well. All the Jining Jinjuan on the clouds were filled with blood qi and had immense life force. It was clear that they were at their peak. Demoness Ji continued, not only that, apart from perfected Lord Yujun of Enigma Palace, the remaining 15 Jining Jinjuan are top-tier experts of Tianhuang mainland. For example, perfected Lord Luo Shui of Snowdrift Valley, perfected Lord Hun Yi of Chaos Essence Sect and perfected Lord Beidou of Heavenly Dipper Sect. None of them are nameless. Su Zimo was even more puzzled and asked, what has the gathering of these people got to do with me? It's because of the battle beneath the human emperor's palace 20 years ago. Demoness Ji replied, don't underestimate the fact that it was merely a fight between Foundation establishment cultivators. However, it caused quite a stir in the various supersections. In that battle, the paragons nurtured by the various super sects were either killed or injured. I reckon that the reason why these top-tier Jining Jinjuan are here is to prevent something like that from happening again. Su Zimo frowned slightly. He had a vague feeling that things were not as simple as they seemed. His spirit perception was extraordinarily sharp. On the surface, the Jining Jinjuan seemed high and mighty, sitting alone in the clouds and speaking freely. Not a single gaze fell on him. However, in the short period of time he had been here, no less than 20 divine senses had already swept past his body. Demoness Ji said, if this was in the past, given the way the fiend sects did things, they wouldn't bother to send Jining Jinjuan into the ancient battlefield. However, this time round, Shura sect and Overlord Palace have sent people as well. Sensing the worry in Su Zimo's heart, Demoness Ji smiled. You don't have to worry either. Enigma Palace is in charge here. Those people won't dare to mess around. Everyone, please be silent. Right then, a voice sounded in midair. It was neither loud nor soft, but it spread to every single corner of Myriad Phenomenon City. Chapter 728. Perfected Lord Yujun's voice sounded with an inexplicable deterrence. The 100,000-odd cultivators gathered near the Myriad Phenomenon peak quietened down before long. The rules of the phenomenon ranking are split into two parts, the elimination battle and the final ranking battle. I won't elaborate on the details. Almost all the cultivators who could arrive at Myriad Phenomenon City were paragons of the various major sects and factions. Even if there were itinerant cultivators, they would have already found out about the rules. Perfected Lord Yujun said in a deep voice, I only want to emphasize one thing. The reason why Fairy Ling Long created the phenomenon ranking back then was not for the human race to kill one another. All of you have to remember that. Indeed, the method of ascending the Myriad Phenomenon peak could prevent excessive bloodshed and casualties. That was where Fairy Ling Long was smart. In the chaotic ancient era, the death of any paragon was a great loss for the human race. When Perfected Lord Yujun said that, his gaze swept past Su Zimo and Di-Yin, it was clear that he was hinting at something. Di-Yin sneered and harumphed softly. Although Perfected Lord Yujun mentioned Su Zimo in the same breath as him, in his heart, Su Zimo was not qualified at all. Fufu. On another cloud, Chaos Essence Sect's Perfected Lord Hun Yi suddenly chuckled. Fellow Taoist Yujun, you mentioned that Fairy Ling Long created the phenomenon ranking for the human race as well. However, pausing for a moment, Perfected Lord Hun Yi changed the topic and said slowly with a hint of killing intent, there seems to be a demon mixed in with the human cultivators below. There were many demon beasts below and most of them were the spirit beast mounts of the paragons. None of them would take part in the fight for the phenomenon ranking. The demon that Perfected Lord Hun Yi was referring to was self-evident. Perfected Lord Hun Yi did not conceal his words and the cultivators below heard him loud and clear. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. Many cultivators turned around and instantly, countless gazes were fixed on Su Zimo. The pressure increased exponentially. Perfected Lord Tianming of Zephyr Thunder Palace said coldly, fellow Taoist Yujun, since when did a beast have the right to fight for the Jin Dan phenomenon ranking? Ba. Monk Wei Fu of Diamond Monastery chanted a Buddhist proclamation softly and whispered, if that's true, we must not let that demon take part in the fight for the phenomenon ranking. 20 years ago, Monk Ju Chen of the Diamond Monastery had lost to Su Zimo, forming a grudge between them. Furthermore, the Purple Thunder Manual was in Su Zimo's hands and Zephyr Thunder Palace's Su Cheng was nearly killed. There was no way Zephyr Thunder Palace would let Su Zimo off. Right now, Chaos Essence Sect and Zephyr Thunder Palace of the Immortal Sects did not hide their intentions and attacked directly. Even Diamond Monastery of the Buddhist monasteries took the opportunity to add insult to injury. Su Zimo frowned slightly. He was well aware of what had happened to him. He was a human. However, because he cultivated the mystic classic of the 12 demon kings of the great wilderness, there was an inner core in his chest. There was no way to explain it. Back then, before Daiyu left, she did not want Su Zimo to continue cultivating the mystic classic of the 12 demon kings of the great wilderness. She must have expected that he would face such a situation in the future. Perfected Lord Luo Shui frowned. She wanted to help. However, if Su Zimo could not explain or prove himself, there was nothing she could do even if she intervened. Little Fatty and the others were secretly anxious as well. However, they did not even have the right to interfere in something as such. If they were to explain, the situation would only worsen. Actually, it's simple. Perfected Lord Beidou of Heavenly Dipper Sect smiled gently and said indifferently, since he's a demon that has infiltrated the human cultivators, let's just kill him and end everything. Although he said it casually, it sent chills down one's spine. Little Fatty and the others felt their hearts skip a beat. It was only at this moment that they realized that the super sects and factions in Myriad Phenomenon City did not only want to deprive Su Zimo of his right to fight for the phenomenon ranking. These people wanted Su Zimo's life. The heavens are benevolent. Fellow Taoists, your killing intent is too strong. Monk Yuan Kong of Hollow Monastery sighed gently. Buddhists are merciful. I'm here to make a suggestion. Finally, Janine Jinjuan stood out to speak for Su Zimo. Little Fatty and the others were invigorated. However, Su Zimo was expressionless. Su Zimo could not sense any kindness from the monk's eyes. Monk Yuan Kong continued, all living beings are created equal. Even if Patron Su is a demon, there's no need to harm his life. Furthermore, there's a chance that he's on the wrong path. As long as he can rein in his horse at the edge of the cliff and let go of his blade, he might be able to return to the right path. Perfected Lord Tian Ming of Zephyr Thunder Palace asked with a fake smile, Reverend, may I ask how one can rein in his horse at the edge of the cliff and let go of his blade? All you have to do is extract the inner core from Patron Su's body, Monk Yuan Kong replied with a smile. When they heard that, the expressions of Little Fatty and the others changed starkly. Heartrending. Although Monk Yuan Kong seemed like he was speaking for Su Zimo, he was even more vicious and vicious. He would definitely be severely injured if his inner core was extracted. Notwithstanding the fact that he was powerless to fight for the phenomenon ranking, how long could Su Zimo survive in this situation where he was surrounded by strong enemies and countless cultivators were eyeing him covetously? Hee hee. Perfected Lord Chu Yu of Overlord Palace sneered and mocked, what a sanctimonious face. Su Zimo's gaze was cold and he said nothing. The killing intent in his heart was already suppressed to its limits. It was impossible for Su Zimo to extract his inner core. Little Fatty and the others were furious and cursed internally. However, they did not dare to say it out loud. No matter what, the other party was Jining Jinjuan. In Myriad Phenomenon City, Jining Jinjuan had absolute authority over life and death. Master, you're wrong. At this moment, a voice sounded from the crowd below. It caused an uproar like a stone that caused 1,000 ripples. The people below were all perfected beings of Jin Dan. Which perfected being of Jin Dan would be so blind as to refute Jining Jinjuan's words? Everyone turned towards the source of the voice. A young monk walked out from behind Su Zimo. Ming Zhen. Little Fatty and the others opened their mouths agape and widened their eyes in shock, their jaws nearly dropped to the ground. Even though they were displeased, they could only curse internally. Yet, Ming Zhen stood out and refuted Monk Yuan Kong in front of everyone. In reality, Little Fatty and the others did not know Ming Zhen well. Ming Zhen spent most of his time at the bottom of the Dragon Burial Valley and was inexperienced in the ways of the world. He had a pure heart. In his heart, right was right and wrong was wrong. He did not care what sect, faction or identity one was from. Be it Jining Jinjuan, Void Reversions, or even Mahayana patriarchs who were wrong, Ming Zhen would point it out. Master, you're not taking pity on Zimo by removing his inner core, it's cruelty. Ming Zhen said in a deep voice, lay down the butcher's knife and become a Buddha. The original intention of that statement is to get someone to lay down the knife in their hands as well as the knife in their hearts. However, Master, your suggestion is not for the other party to lay down the butcher's knife, but to sever the other party's arm that wields the knife. When you made that suggestion, the butcher's knife in your heart was already in your hands. You might not be able to see it, but just now, your appearance has turned menacing like a malevolent ghost. The Buddhist monasteries emphasize that one's appearance is born from one's heart. Master, you've gone mad. Impressive. Su Zimo praised internally. Every single word pointed at the flaws. His words were like sharp swords that pierced Monk Yuan Kong's Tao heart. Even the dozens of Jining Jinjuan present exclaimed internally, let alone Su Zimo. They glared at Ming Zhen below with bright gazes. Chapter 729. Perfected being Jin Dan was shocked at Ming Zhen's guts to stand out and rebut Jining Jinjuan. Or rather, it was no longer a rebuttal, but a reprimand. He was reprimanding a Jining Jinjuan as a perfected being Jin Dan. As for perfected Lord Yu Jun and the others, they were shocked at the supreme wisdom contained in Ming Zhen's words. The few eminent monks of the Buddhist monasteries were especially shocked. Monk Yuan Kong's expression turned extremely terrible. His cultivation and combat strength were far above Ming Zhen's. However, this kind of verbal confrontation was a competition of the understanding of the profound meaning of Buddhism, a competition of the root of wisdom, and a competition of the comprehension of Buddhism and Zen-ji. In that aspect, Monk Yuan Kong was at a disadvantage. He could neither refute nor argue against Mingzhen's sharp words. That was because he knew clearly in the depths of his heart that he had indeed harbored evil intentions and killing intent just now. Now that Mingzhen had grasped onto his weakness, his Tao heart was shaken with a few words. You're just a little monk who's still wet behind the ears. Even if you've been cultivating since you were in your mother's womb, how many Buddhist sutras have you read and comprehended? Do you know what is benevolence and cruelty? Do you know what is good and evil? Monk Yuan Kong hollered with a dark expression. At that moment, Monk Yuan Kong even used the power of Sanskrit of the Buddhist monasteries. Although it did not have the might of the Daming True Sutra, he was Jinying Jinjuan after all. In fact, there was even a trace of dharmic power fluctuation in the void that was shuddering. All the cultivators could sense that Monk Yuan Kong was truly enraged. Caught off guard, Mingzhen's body swayed from the impact of the Sanskrit and his face turned pale. However, there was no hint of fear in Mingzhen's eyes. They were clear and bright as he said word by word, there's no seniority in learning. The one who reaches the top is the master. That counterattack was truly powerful. Although it was a simple statement, it struck Monk Yuan Kong's vitals once more. In Little Fatty's words, even though Monk Yuan Kong was old, he had lived a dog's life. He could still be Monk Yuan Kong's master. The hearts of Su Zimo and the others sank. Under everyone's watchful eyes, Monk Yuan Kong was completely humiliated to be berated by a perfected Jin Dan with no way of retorting. Monk Yuan Kong was on the verge of going berserk. Now that Mingzhen had retorted with that statement, he would definitely get himself killed. You're courting death. Indeed, Monk Yuan Kong's eyes were widened and his expression was murderous. Rumble. Monk Yuan Kong was enraged and extended his massive palm, spreading his fingers. Dharmic powers surged in midair and formed a gigantic hand that blotted out the skies, crushing towards Mingzhen who was on the ground. The voids trembled with a terrifying might. This was Jinying Jinjuan's doing. Perfected Jin Dan, who was on the ground, felt a huge shadow looming over him. In an instant, the pressure on him increased greatly, and he almost suffocated. If that was the case for perfected being Jin Dan who was at the periphery, it was hard to imagine how much pressure Mingzhen had to endure after being targeted by Monk Yuan Kong. Mingzhen grunted as blood seeped out from the corner of his mouth. Apart from Monk Yuan Kong, there were 4 other perfected lords of the Buddhist monasteries in midair. However, some of the 4 perfected lords were expressionless, some lowered their heads and some pretended not to see anything. Even though they knew that Monk Yuan Kong was trying to oppress him out of anger, the 4 perfected lords of the Buddhist monasteries had no intention of helping him. It was truly not a wise choice to offend Monk Yuan Kong for the sake of a nameless monk with no background. They considered the pros and cons, not right or wrong. That was also the reason why Mingzhen was so rare. This was a matter of the Buddhist monasteries. If those of the Buddhist monasteries were to watch with folded arms, the immortal and fiend sects would not interfere either. Furthermore, Mingzhen was on Su Zimo's side and the Jinying Jinjuan of the immortal sects were secretly gloating. A green figure flashed and blocked in front of Mingzhen, withstanding most of the pressure that was crushing down. Su Zimo raised his head slightly and his eyes shone brightly with killing intent. His black hair danced wildly and his blood chi surged. Jin Dan circulated and he was prepared to fight with all his might. He was not going to watch as Mingzhen was suppressed nor was he going to allow himself to be captured. He did not care about the Golden Core Phenomenon ranking, Ancient Phenomenon Steel or the generous rewards. He did not care anymore. Since they were so overbearing, he was going to kill them all first. Perfected Lord Yujun frowned slightly. Just as he raised his hand to stop them, he seemed to have sensed something. Perfected Lord Yujun's gaze landed on the crowd not far away, and his gaze flickered for a moment before he lowered his hand. Ba. Accompanied by a Buddhist chant, a faint fiery glow suddenly appeared in mid-air, blocking Monk Yuan Kong's giant hand of dermic power. Whoosh! Although the flame seemed weak and could be extinguished by a single gust of wind, it burned instantly against Monk Yuan Kong's dermic power palm. Crackle! The flame spread and surged into the air with dermic power. Monk Yuan Kong's expression changed starkly as he retracted his palm hurriedly. Even so, he was still half a step too late. Monk Yuan Kong's sleeve was caught by a spark and burned to ashes instantly. The flames had yet to extinguish and were already burning towards his arm. A cold glint flashed through Monk Yuan Kong's eyes as he bit his tongue gently and spat out a stream of essence blood. Extinguish! Monk Yuan Kong hollered, and the essence blood exploded in midair, forming a scarlet blood mist that landed on his arm. Shing! The flame on his arm was extinguished and a faint green smoke was emitted. Monk Yuan Kong heaved a sigh of relief. If he had reacted any slower, his arm might have been gone. In that instant, he broke out in a cold sweat. When he noticed the turn of events, Su Zimo suppressed his killing intent for the time being as well. There seemed to be a chance for the situation to turn around, and it was not to the point of mutual destruction. Jining Jinjuan, who was in midair, frowned as he glared at the faint flame hovering in midair. It was clear that he recognized the origin of the flame and looked around. Monk Yuan Kong snapped out of his stupor and surveyed his surroundings with a dark expression, barking coldly, "Monk Yin Lu, come out." On the ground, a middle-aged monk soared into the air from the dense crowd. Dipankara Monastery. Noticing the badge on the middle-aged monk's waist, Little Fatty and the others pondered for a moment before recognizing it. Prior to this, only 5 of the 6 Buddhist monasteries were present. Dipankara Monastery was the only one absent. The successor of Dipankara Monastery did not appear in the ancient battlefield 20 years ago as well. In Su Zimo's impression, this monastery was extremely mysterious. Ji Qingtian whispered, "Monk Yin Lu of Dipankara Monastery is rather famous in Tianhuang mainland. His strength is unfathomable and he has the reputation of being the Dipankara flame, Monk Yin Lu. He's one of the top Jining Jinjuan." Su Zimo nodded. Just Monk Yin Lu's display of strength was shocking enough. Even Monk Yuan Kong had suffered a small loss. Monk Yin Lu came close to the faint flame and extended his finger, tapping the flame gently. The frightening flame seemed to have entered Monk Yin Lu's finger and vanished in the blink of an eye. "Monk Yin Lu, what's the meaning of this?" Monk Yuan Kong asked coldly, "You're going against me because of this little monk?" Monk Yin Lu smiled gently. "Fellow Taoist Yuan Kong, this little friend is right. Just now, your appearance is truly detestable and menacing. My flame is not burning you, it's burning the demon in your heart." Chapter 730. Monk Yuan Kong's expression was terrible. Above the clouds, Monk Wei Fu of Diamond Monastery asked indifferently, "Monk Yin Lu, none of your disciples from Dipankara Monastery have obtained the legacy teachings all these years. You're only embarrassing yourself by participating in the fight for the phenomenon ranking. What are you doing here in Myriad Phenomenon City?" "I'm here to select disciples," Monk Yin Lu smiled gently. In Myriad Phenomenon City, itinerant cultivators with outstanding performances would naturally be invited by the various supersections. However, it was extremely difficult for the Buddhist monasteries to select disciples, and the conditions were rather harsh as well. There were extremely few Buddhist cultivators in Tianhuang mainland to begin with. There were even fewer Buddhist cultivators who could pass through the various tests and arrive at this place. Almost all of them came from the 6 monasteries and 108 upper sects of the Buddhist monasteries. Fufu. Monk Yuan Kong sneered, "Dipankara Monastery is here to select disciples. What a joke. Who would want to cultivate in Dipankara Monastery?" Su Zimo was confused. No matter what, Dapamkara Monastery was one of the 6 monasteries of the Buddhist monasteries and was a super sect. It was also a pilgrimage ground for all Buddhist cultivators in the world. Why would anyone be unwilling? Demonis G said, Dapamkara Monastery's cultivation techniques and secret skills are famous for being obscure and difficult to understand. Many Buddhist cultivators with wisdom joined Dapamkara Monastery, but they did not achieve much in their entire lives. Dapamkara Monastery has very few disciples and is deserted. Many monks merely sit in front of ancient Buddhas all day long with only the green lanterns by their side. How can ordinary people endure the loneliness? At that point, Su Zimo was enlightened. It was no wonder why no legacy disciples of Dapamkara Monastery appeared in the elementary ancient battlefield 20 years ago and the intermediate ancient battlefield now. That was most likely the most important reason. Of course. Demonis G changed the topic. Although Dapamkara Monastery's cultivation techniques are obscure and difficult to cultivate, one's strength will be extremely terrifying if they obtain the legacy teachings. It won't be an exaggeration to say that they'll be the best of the Buddhist monasteries. Monk Yin Lu was not annoyed by Monk Yuan Kong's mockery and merely smiled with his fingers. I already have a candidate in mind. If you don't mind, you can enter Dapamkara Monastery to cultivate. The direction that Monk Yin Lu was pointing at was where Mingzhen was. Monk Yuan Kong sneered with a mocking expression, this little monk has a glib tongue. How capable can he be to leave his name on the phenomenon ranking? It doesn't matter how capable you are or how strong you are. Monk Yin Lu shook his head. He has the root of wisdom and has a deep understanding of Buddhism. That's enough. Besides, having a glib tongue isn't necessarily a bad thing. Legend has it that when Buddha preaches, he can spit out lotus flowers from his mouth. It can even cause flowers to fall from the sky, golden lotuses to bloom from the ground, and Buddhas to appear all over the sky. Ignorant brat, how can you be compared to Buddha? How laughable. In the long run, I think the inheritance of your Dapamkara temple will be broken. Monk Wei Fu shook his head. The other cultivators also had faint mocking looks on their faces. In their opinion, although Mingzhen's words were sharp and he had a deep understanding of Buddhism, what use was that? When facing an enemy, could it be that he could subdue them with just his mouth? In the end, he had to rely on thunderous methods to suppress the evil spirits. Among the endless crowd, Di Yin was the only one who frowned. While others did not know about Mingzhen's background, he was the clearest. Young friend, are you willing? Monk Yin Lu ignored everyone's gazes and merely looked at Mingzhen with a smile. Mingzhen was a little lost and looked at Su Zimo beside him instinctively. Su Zimo pondered for a moment before nodding. Although the cultivation environment of Dapamkara Temple was dull, it was nothing for Mingzhen. If Mingzhen could adapt to a life like that at the bottom of the Dragon Burial Valley, he would definitely be able to handle the cultivation environment of Dapamkara Temple with ease. As for the obscure cultivation techniques of Dapamkara Temple, that might not be an issue for Mingzhen. Up till this point of his cultivation, Mingzhen had been comprehending the true sutras of Daming and Fahua monasteries. There was probably no Buddhist cultivator that could compare to his foundation. Furthermore, Mingzhen had even received guidance from the mysterious old monk at the bottom of the Dragon Burial Valley. Of course, the most important thing was Monk Yin Lu's attitude towards Mingzhen. Just now, it was clear that Monk Yuan Kong was bullying a junior and the attitude of the other 4 major sects of the Buddhist monasteries was to stand by idly. Monk Yin Lu of Dapamkara Temple was the only one who made a move. Mingzhen took a deep breath and nodded, bowing deeply to Monk Yin Lu. I'm Mingzhen. Thank you for your kindness, senior, I'm willing to join Dapamkara Temple. Good, good, good. Monk Yin Lu said thrice in a gratified manner. Perfected Lord Yujun nodded gently as well. Congratulations, fellow Taoist. Please take a seat. Perfected Lord Yujun raised his hand gently and a faint mist flew out from his sleeves. It paused in front of Monk Yin Lu and transformed into a pure white cloud in the blink of an eye. Monk Yuan Kong sneered, let's see if this young monk Ming Zhen can make a name for himself in Tianhuang mainland in the future. Piak. Right then, perfected Lord Han Yi clapped his palms and said slowly, everyone, the phenomenon ranking is about to open. Let's deal with the demon below first. That's right. Perfected Lord Tian Ming of Zephyr Thunder Palace said coldly as well, let's kill that lad first. We'll talk about everything else later. That's the way it should be. Perfected Lord Bei Do of Heavenly Dipper Sect, Perfected Lords of Clear Wind Temple, Hollow Monastery, Purple Firmament Sect and many other immortal and Buddhist sects agreed and nodded in agreement. The two Perfected Lords of the Fiend sects remained silent. Although both of them despised the actions of the Perfected Lords of the immortal and Buddhist sects, they would not go against all the major factions for the sake of Su Zimo. Monk Yin Lu frowned slightly. There was nothing he could do about this matter either. After all, even he did not know if Su Zimo was a human or demon. If Su Zimo could prove that he was a human, there would be a chance for him to survive. However, if he could not prove it, he would not be able to escape this calamity. Su Zimo's gaze was cold as he reached for his storage bag slowly. Don't be rash. Suddenly, a voice sounded in Su Zimo's mind. Unknowingly, Lin Xuanji had already arrived beside Su Zimo. We're not at that stage yet. This is Myriad Phenomenon City and the phenomenon ranking is a major matter that Enigma Palace is in charge of. It's not up to outsiders to decide. Lin Xuanji shook his head gently and stopped Su Zimo with his gaze. Right then, Perfected Lord Yujun surveyed his surroundings and said slowly, if you're going to kill demons, are you guys going to kill all the spirit beasts below? Perfected Lord Luo Shui heaved a sigh of relief. Given this situation, Perfected Lord Yujun of Enigma Palace was the only one who could salvage the situation. Perfected Lord Han Yi and the others frowned. If Enigma Palace chose to stand on Su Zimo's side, things would be troublesome. On one hand, it was because of Enigma Palace's transcendent status. On the other hand, it was because of Perfected Lord Yujun himself. Although cultivators of Enigma Palace rarely participated in the fights of the cultivation world, nobody dared to underestimate them. How can that be compared? Monk Yuan Kong said in a deep voice, the demons below are all spirit beasts reared by our disciples and won't take part in the fight for the phenomenon ranking to begin with. That's right. That lad is a demon but he wants to fight for the phenomenon ranking. That means that he's after the treasures of the human race. His intentions are merciless and he should be beheaded. Perfected Lord Tian Ming of Zephyr Thunder Palace said with a murderous aura. Perfected Lord Han Yi's eyes shone brightly as he hollered, Perfected Lord Yujun, are you going to help the demons brazenly and go against the major sects of the human race? Are you going to betray the human race and become a sinner of Enigma Palace? Chapter 731. The huge crime of betraying the human race was pinned mercilessly. Monk Yin Lu sighed internally. That was what he was worried about as well. Just now, if he were to step forward, he would definitely be criticized as well. Neither he nor Dipankara Monastery could bear the consequences of such a crime. However, Perfected Lord Yujun remained calm and composed despite the pressure and questioning of the few Perfected Lords. Enigma Palace had a transcendent status and did not belong to any of the immortal, Buddhist or fiend sects, they had the confidence to do so. How do you guys know that he's a demon? Perfected Lord Yujun asked instead. He cultivated an inner core. As long as he activates it, demonic chi will spread. If he's not a demon, what is he? Perfected Lord Tian Ming replied coldly. Oh. Perfected Lord Yujun asked again, since he cultivated the Jin Dan, spirit energy will spread as long as he activates it and it's a double phenomenon, doesn't that make him a cultivator? You. Perfected Lord Tian Ming was speechless for a moment. Monk Wei Fu pondered for a moment before saying, if we're not sure, we'll disqualify him from the phenomenon ranking first. Yes, that works too, Perfected Lord Beidou nodded. When he heard that, Su Zimo sneered internally. These people wanted to disqualify him from the Jin Dan phenomenon ranking after seeing that Perfected Lord Yujun was unwilling to back down. Perfected Lord Yujun replied indifferently, "There's no need for that. Since you guys don't know if he's a human or demon, we'll let the myriad phenomenon peak tell you." "What do you mean?" Perfected Lord Hun Yi frowned. Perfected Lord Yujun pointed to the myriad phenomenon peak and said deeply, "Fairy Ling Long's dermic powers are imbued on this peak and have not dissipated through history. If outsiders dare to climb the myriad phenomenon peak, it'll be equivalent to challenging Fairy Ling Long's authority and they'll definitely be killed mercilessly. If he's a human, he's naturally qualified to fight for the myriad phenomenon peak. If he's a demon, he only has himself to blame if he's killed by the dermic powers left behind by Fairy Ling Long." Although his words were harsh, Su Zimo could tell that Perfected Lord Yujun was helping him. If the other Perfected Lords had any doubts after that statement, they would not challenge Perfected Lord Yujun or Enigma Palace, but Fairy Ling Long. Just as expected. Perfected Lord Hun Yi snorted. Perfected Lord Tian Ming and the others had grim expressions as they exchanged glances without saying anything else. The brief confrontation between Jining Jinjuan and Perfected Jin Dan was extremely tense, and his palms were sweating profusely. However, he did not expect that many super sects of the immortal and Buddhist sects would join forces to attack Su Zimo. Their forces were almost ready and they were about to attack and kill Su Zimo. However, Perfected Lord Yujun resolved everything with just a few words. Su Zimo's heart lightened, and the killing intent in his eyes gradually receded. "There's one thing you need to pay attention to when climbing the manifestation of nature peak. Do not use the force of your inner core under any circumstances. Once any demonic chi is emitted, even if it's just a wisp, it will be destroyed by the myriad phenomenon peak." Suddenly, these words appeared in Su Zimo's mind. Perfected Lord Yujun was using his spirit consciousness to remind Su Zimo out of goodwill. No one else could hear it. Su Zimo looked at Perfected Lord Yujun gratefully. If not for Perfected Lord Yujun's appearance, he would have attacked just now. "Thank you." Su Zimo glanced sideways at Lin Xuanji beside him and thanked him softly. He did not know Perfected Lord Yujun and the only interaction he had with Enigma Palace was Lin Xuanji. In Su Zimo's opinion, Lin Xuanji must be the reason why Perfected Lord Yujun helped him. Unexpectedly, Lin Xuanji shook his head. "It's not just because of me. Don't forget, you've obtained the recognition of the Human Emperor's Palace. That alone is enough for Enigma Palace to help you." Su Zimo was enlightened. The Human Emperor and Fairy Ling Long were Dao companions. Obtaining the recognition of the Human Emperor's Palace was equivalent to obtaining the recognition of Enigma Palace. Everything was truly mysterious when he thought about it carefully. Jin Dan, the elimination battle of the phenomenon ranking has officially begun. Right then, Perfected Lord Yujun's voice sounded once more, reverberating through every single corner of Myriad Phenomenon City. Boom! A commotion broke out in the crowd. Needless to say, the cultivators participating in the fight for the phenomenon ranking were nervous and excited. Even the cultivators spectating the battle were extremely excited. The fight for the phenomenon ranking this time round was going to be extremely intense. Today, there would be hundreds and thousands of Jin Dan phenomenons clashing here. Many lost ancient phenomenons would reappear and shine through the voids, competing with one another in a blinding radiance. How majestic would that be? This was going to be a grand cultivation event that no one could replicate in their entire lives. Today, the most terrifying, the most talented, and the most promising people in the Tianhuang continent would be chosen. There was a high chance that these people would become Dao lords and mighty figures in the future. It was unknown if some of them would become emperors in the future. Tisk, tsk, tsk. Ren Tu of Shura sect let out a sinister laugh and said coldly, "Let's see how capable all the paragons are." Clang! Clang! A series of sword hums sounded from Hang Chuyu's body in a sharp manner. I love grand events as such the most. Come, let's fight. Pang Yu of Overlord Palace licked his lips with a rumbling battle intent. Amitba, here I come. Monk Ju Chen of Diamond Monastery chanted a Buddhist proclamation and headed towards the myriad phenomenon peak in a flash. Monk Jian Kong, Guda Jian, Su Cheng, Duan Qingping, Wu Feng, and the others moved as well. Di Yin glanced at Su Zimo and sneered before speeding off in a flash. Ji Qingtian said, let's go as well. All right. Su Zimo nodded. Lin Xuanji was a cultivator of Enigma Palace and would not take part in the fight for the phenomenon ranking in their group. Although Shi Jian was a legacy disciple of Puppet Sect, his capabilities were all on puppets and he would not take part without cultivating a Jin Dan phenomenon. Xiaoning and Leng Ro were legacy disciples of Elixir Yang Sect and Chiguramon, and both of them cultivated Jin Dan phenomenons. However, they knew that they had no chance of fighting for the phenomenon ranking and chose to spectate as well. The remaining Ming Zhen, Ji Qingtian, and Little Fatty chose to take part in the fight for the phenomenon ranking as well. In midair, Monk Yuan Kong noticed this and could not help but chuckle in surprise. Monk Yin Lu, that disciple of yours is going to ascend the myriad phenomenon peak. Interesting. Monk Wei Fu remarked indifferently, he's probably cultivating some messy Jin Dan phenomenon and thinks that he's qualified to fight for the phenomenon ranking. In reality, he's just going to embarrass himself. I reckon that he won't even be able to ascend the second stone step. Monk Yuan Kong said. Jining Jinjuan chuckled and waited to watch the show. Against the mockery of the two of them, Monk Yin Lu was neither angry nor bothered. Monk Yin Lu merely looked at Ming Zhen with a faint smile and instructed, there's no need to feel pressured. Just do your best. It's fine even if you fail. A ranking list won't determine your future. Yes, Ming Zhen nodded. Su Zimo shook his head gently and smiled indifferently. Nobody knew Ming Zhen's strength better than him. Monk Yuan Kong once said that he wanted to see what sort of name Ming Zhen could create in Tianhuang mainland in the future. There was no need for the future. Right now, right here and right now. Ming Zhen, this unassuming little monk, was going to shock the world with a single feat. Chapter 732. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. Figures sprinted towards the myriad phenomenon peak one after another. There were at least 100,000 paragons participating in the fight for the phenomenon ranking this time round, and it was a spectacular sight. However, many of them were sent flying by the power of the myriad phenomenon peak before they could even stabilize their footing on the first stone step of the myriad phenomenon peak. Figures were sent flying one after another in a wretched manner. It was an even more spectacular sight. Cries of shock filled the air. The crowd was in chaos. Above the clouds, the Jining Jinjuan shook their heads and chuckled. There would always be cultivators like that who refused to believe in heresy and attempted to ascend the myriad phenomenon peak in every phenomenon ranking fight. However, the outcome would always be the same. The myriad phenomenon peak was filled with the footprints and auras of the ancient emperors. It was not that easy to ascend. In less than 15 minutes, more than half of the 100,000 paragons were eliminated. This was the elimination battle. The most efficient method was to eliminate the weaker cultivators. As for the cultivators who ascended the myriad phenomenon peak, they faced different situations. Some of them were drenched in sweat, clearly under immense pressure. Some of them swayed and could be sent flying at any moment. Some of the cultivators could not withstand it and released their Jin Dan phenomenons right away. Instantly, the power of phenomenons surged forth one after another from the myriad phenomenon peak, and the spirit energy in the vicinity surged. There were rosy clouds flying in the sky, radiant rays of light, swaying vegetation, bright seas, and bright moons. The appearance of many Jin Dan phenomenons was extremely shocking. Of course, everyone knew that the cultivators who released their Jin Dan phenomenons were those who were weak and could not withstand the pressure of the myriad phenomenon peak. For example, some of the top paragons of the Jin Dan realm did not need to use their Jin Dan phenomenons to ascend the bottom stone steps of the myriad phenomenon peak. They could ascend step by step with just their physique, bloodline and spirit energy. Eh! A soft exclamation sounded from above the clouds. Initially, Monk Yuan Kong was waiting to see Ming Zhen make a fool of himself. Unexpectedly, Ming Zhen ascended the second stone step with ease without slowing down at all. That alone meant that Ming Zhen's strength had already surpassed most of the cultivators present. "I've disappointed you guys," Monk Yin Lu smiled gently. Initially, he thought that Ming Zhen would stop at the first stone step as well. Unexpectedly, Ming Zhen really gave him a pleasant surprise. Monk Yuan Kong harumphed coldly. "That's nothing much. There are more than 10,000 cultivators on the myriad phenomenon peak right now. Let's talk about whether they're qualified to make it into the top 108. One had to know that the myriad phenomenon peak was 18,000 feet tall and had a total of 108 steps. The height between each stone step was also more than 1,000 feet. It was rather difficult to cross a stone step. The closer he got to the peak, the greater the pressure. In less than an hour, there were only slightly over 10,000 cultivators left on the myriad phenomenon peak. The 10,000 or so cultivators gradually distanced themselves from each other and split into different groups. As expected, the person in the lead was the number one perfected being, Di Yin. Di Yin's method of climbing the myriad phenomenon peak attracted waves of exclamations. He did not use the stone steps of the myriad phenomenon peak as a stepping stone at all. Instead, he soared into the air and sped towards the peak at a shocking speed, leaving the other cultivators far behind him. The power that surged from the peak did not seem to have any effect on Di Yin. Apart from Di Yin, the true first group consisted of Ren Tu of Shura sect, Su Cheng of Zephyr Thunder Palace, Monk Jian Kong of Hollow Monastery, Dugu Jian, Hang Qiuyu of Sword sect, Peng Yu of Overlord Palace, Monk Zhu Chen of Diamond Monastery and Ming Zhen. This outcome shocked many cultivators. Ren Tu, Su Cheng, Monk Jian Kong, Hang Qiuyu, Peng Yu, and Monk Zhu Chen were all top-tier paragons, and it was within everyone's expectations that they would be in the first group. What the crowd did not expect was that there were actually two unknown cultivators who managed to squeeze in. Furthermore, they did not show any signs of falling behind as they followed closely behind. One of them was Dugu Jian from a gentry clan of the North region. Sword cultivators were a rather unique type of cultivators and were known for their terrifying killing strength. As for Sword sect, it was a pilgrimage ground for all sword cultivators. Now that a sword cultivator from a small place was advancing alongside a legacy disciple of Sword sect, it caused quite a stir. On the myriad phenomenon peak, Hang Qiuyu's gaze was sharp as a sword as he glanced at Dugu Jian from time to time. However, Dugu Jian ignored him and merely lowered his head, looking at the sword in his hands and advancing silently. The other shocking person was Ming Zhen. Nobody expected that Ming Zhen would be qualified to stand alongside the two strongest paragons of the Buddhist monasteries. Furthermore, judging from the current situation, Ming Zhen's aura was continuous and there were no signs of exhaustion. Monk Yuan Kong's expression was terrible. This was not just about leaving a name on the phenomenon ranking. There was a high chance that he could even fight for the top 10 of the phenomenon ranking. Congratulations to Dapamkara Monastery for selecting a genius, perfected Lord Luo Shui smiled gently and congratulated with cupped fists. Monk Yin Lu smiled. Even with his temperament, he could not conceal the joy in his eyes. Dapamkara Monastery sure is lucky to have come to Myriad Phenomenon City and picked up a bargain, Clear Heart Nunnery's perfected lord said sourly. At that moment, the disciples of Clear Heart Nunnery had already fallen to the third echelon and she was naturally indignant. Monk Wei Fu frowned gently. It's useless even if we're in the first echelon for now. At the end of the day, we'll have to rely on Jin Dan's phenomenon to withstand the pressure and advance. That's right, Monk Yuan Kong said, without the support of a powerful Jin Dan phenomenon, everything right now is nothing more than an illusion. Monk Yin Lu did not refute. However, in his heart, he was secretly anticipating what Mingzhen's golden core phenomenon would look like. There were clearly more cultivators in the second echelon. Pure Maiden Sect's Demoness Ji, Tomb Sect's Little Fatty, Clear Wind Temple's Duan Qingping, Purple Firmament Sect's Wu Feng, Snowdrift Valley's Ling Han, Chaos Essence Sect's Nia Hao and Illusion Fiend Cult's Qin Li were in the second echelon with about 30 people. There were even more people in the third echelon with more than 100 people. The cultivators in the first two echelons had yet to release their Jin Dan phenomenons. As for the cultivators in the third echelon, their speed of climbing the myriad phenomenon peak was getting slower and they were gradually showing signs of exhaustion. Some of the cultivators could not hold on any longer and were starting to release their Jin Dan phenomenons. Ji Qingtian was in the third echelon. As for the cultivators at the back, they were in the fourth echelon. Although there were hundreds of them, they were scattered and cultivators would be sent flying by the myriad phenomenon peak from time to time. Those people stopped at the bottom of the myriad phenomenon peak and had almost no chance of leaving their names on the phenomenon ranking. Right now, the cultivators who had a chance of leaving their names on the phenomenon ranking were almost certain. They would have to choose from the first three echelons with a total of more than 100 people. The final ranking would have to wait until the climb of the myriad phenomenon peak was completed to see which cultivators managed to climb the most stone steps. The closer one was to the peak, the higher one's ranking on the phenomenon ranking would be. Where's Su Zimo? That person has 2 phenomenons and even defeated Su Cheng of Zephyr Thunder Palace. No matter what, he should be in the first echelon. Why don't I see him? A commotion broke out in the crowd. Look, there he is. Many cultivators expanded their scope and soon discovered that Su Zimo was in the fourth echelon. He was inconspicuous and looked like he had faded into the crowd. How could that be? Could that person have truly been suppressed after cultivating his inner core? Fufu, that's truly his own doing. He can't blame anyone else. Some people in the crowd sneered while others were worried. Lin Xuanji narrowed his eyes and exclaimed softly, realizing that something was amiss. Chapter 733. Indeed, Su Zimo was in the fourth echelon. However, unlike the other cultivators in the fourth echelon, Su Zimo's aura was steady and his expression was normal, as though he was not under any pressure. The reason why Su Zimo was relegated to the fourth echelon was because he would pause for a long time on the stone step with his eyes closed in deep thought every time he ascended a stone step. No one knew what he was thinking about. After a while, Su Zimo would move and ascend to the next stone step. What is he doing? Lin Xuanji rubbed his chin in confusion. He was not the only one, even the Jining Jinjuan above the clouds could not understand Su Zimo's actions. Nobody knew that Su Zimo was comprehending more than anything else while resisting the pressure of the myriad phenomenon peak. The myriad phenomenon peak had existed for countless years. Throughout history, almost all the powerful Jin Dan phenomenons had left their traces and auras on it. The phenomenons of the immortal, Buddhist and fiend sects were all included within. Su Zimo was not heaven-defying or a monster incarnate to be able to comprehend the essence of those phenomenons. However, by comprehending the traces and auras of the Jin Dan phenomenons, he could deepen his understanding of the immortal, Buddhist and fiend Daos. Jin Dan phenomenons were the pinnacle of spirit arts. They contained all the comprehensions of a cultivator from the Qi condensation realm to the Jin Dan realm. Only by fusing them together and evolving them would a phenomenon be born. Through comprehending the Jin Dan phenomenons, Su Zimo's Jin Dan became smoother as well. The 3 auras of the immortal, Buddhist and fiend Daos circled around the Jin Dan and shone brightly. The Jin Dan spun slowly, fusing fire and water together with yin and yang. It turned perfected and pure, as though it had existed for eternity and was as old as heaven and earth, shining with the sun and moon. That was the true Jin Dan. That was the true perfected state. That was an extremely precious and irreplaceable experience. If Su Zimo wanted to establish his Tao, there was no way he would miss out on such an opportunity. It was extremely difficult to establish one's Tao. To this day, Su Zimo still had no clue. Perhaps, he could only try his best to comprehend the profoundness of the immortal, Buddhist and fiend sects and experience the mysteries of the demonic Tao. Only then would he be able to find a dharmic formulation suitable for mortals to cultivate. Every time he ascended a step, the aura of a different Jin Dan phenomenon would surge toward him. Su Zimo closed his eyes and sensed carefully. Other cultivators climbed the myriad phenomenon peak for nothing more than fame and fortune. As for Su Zimo, standing on the myriad phenomenon peak, he had already transcended the boundaries of fame and fortune. In his eyes, there was only the common people. In his chest, there was a vast universe. In his heart, there was an even greater ambition. Most of the cultivators in the fourth echelon could only give up when they saw that it was hopeless. Only Su Zimo was silently moving forward. In the third echelon, all the cultivators could no longer hold on and released their Jin Dan phenomenons. As for the 100-odd people in the third echelon, the difference in strength was gradually revealed. Ji Qingtian released the legacy phenomenon of Misty Peak and stopped at the 25th step. He was drenched in sweat and his stamina was exhausted, he was at his limits. Some cultivators were at the 20th step while others were at the 26th and 27th steps. Looking up, there were at least one or two people stopping at every step. Thankfully, there was no one else on the stone step where Ji Qingtian was at. That way, there would be less fighting after the elimination round. Can you go up another step? Suddenly, a voice sounded in Ji Qingtian's ears. Turning around, he saw Su Zimo leaping onto the 25th step and standing beside him. I can't take it anymore. I'm at my limits. Ji Qingtian wiped away the sweat on his forehead and panted slightly before smiling. Junior brother Su, don't bother about me. Continue forward. Yes, Su Zimo nodded. Given Ji Qingtian's position, he should be ranked around the 100th place on the phenomenon ranking if nothing went wrong. Although it didn't seem like a high ranking, this was already the best result for Ji Qingtian, or rather, for Misty Peak's legacy phenomenon, Ethereal Sword. There were only 108 people on the phenomenon ranking. Every single cultivator who could leave their names on it was a true paragon of the current era. At that moment, Dean was already at the 99th step. He had stopped here 100 years ago. Now that he had returned, his aura was majestic and he did not stop at the 99th step. Soaring through the void, he arrived at the 100th step before descending. Dean had left everyone far behind. The 8 people in the first echelon continued walking side by side and none of them released their Jin Dan phenomenons. However, as they ascended, there were gradually differences between the 8 of them. For example, Overlord Palace and Diamond Monastery were super sects that were famous for body tempering. Pang Yu and Monk Ju Chen's bloodlines surged and their auras were long. Although they did not release their Jin Dan phenomenons, they looked more relaxed. However, there was a clear difference in their stamina between Shura sect's Ren Tu, Hollow Monastery's monk Jian Kong and Zephyr Thunder Palace's Su Cheng and the others. Some of them were breathing more hurriedly. Some of them were sweating profusely. What was even more shocking was that Mingzhen's stamina did not seem to be weaker than Pang Yu and Monk Ju Chen. Mingzhen's face was smooth as jade without any sweat and his breathing was steady. It was clear that he had yet to reach his body's limits. What's the background of that little monk? What cultivation technique does he cultivate? Monk Wei Fu frowned slightly. He must have had some fortuitous encounters and obtained some opportunities, perfected Lord Beidou said in a deep voice. It's still too early to make a conclusion. The final rankings of the few of them will depend on how much power they can release with their Jin Dan phenomenons. Even though that was the case, Jining Jinjuan knew that no matter how weak Mingzhen's Jin Dan phenomenon was, he would be ranked in the top 20 of the phenomenon ranking at the very least. That was already rather frightening. Even legacy disciples of super sects might not be able to get into the top 20. For example, the legacy disciple of Clear Heart Nunnery and Shengguanyu of Cloud Rains sect had already fallen to the third tier. Some cultivators in the second tier could not hold on any longer and released their Jin Dan phenomenons as well. Little Fatty was still persevering. If not for the fact that his body was cleansed by a wisp of Acheron's mist in the astral dragon's sputum lair, he would not have lasted till now and would have been left far behind. Rise! Soaring Feather Sect's paragon hollered softly. Behind him, the sound of crashing waves could be heard. The water current was rapid and gushed towards the east, creating waves after waves. Above this long river, a blood-red sun was gradually setting. The setting sun dyed half the skies red in an incomparably tragic manner. Even the surface of the river was dyed red, as though it had transformed into a river of blood with a nauseating stench. Look, it's Soaring Feather Sect's legacy phenomenon. Ancient phenomenon, Long River Sunset. A series of exclamations sounded from the crowd. With the support of Jin Dan's phenomenon, the paragon of Soaring Feather Sect was invigorated and felt much more relaxed. His speed increased as he sprinted towards the peak of the mountain. Galaxy Vortex. Heavenly Dipper Sect's paragon could not hold on either and released Jin Dan's phenomenon instantly. Night descended instantly. The firmaments above his head were filled with stars that shone with a bedazzling light. All of a sudden, it was as though they were being pulled by something. The stars in the skies began to spin continuously and gradually formed a gigantic vortex. When the stars collided, sparks flew everywhere and a shuddering energy fluctuation burst forth. The center of the vortex could almost destroy everything. Heavenly Dipper Sect's paragon roared and his speed increased. The other paragons of the second tier released Jin Dan phenomenons one after another as well. Instantly, many ancient phenomenons shone through the voids and shocked everyone. Chapter 734. The cultivators near the myriad phenomenon peak felt their blood boil at the sight of that. This was the only chance for them to witness the clash of multiple ancient phenomenons. There were millions of cultivators in the cultivation world. However, the only ones who had the chance to witness this were the hundreds of thousands of people in Myriad Phenomenon City. Hurry, look! That's the ancient phenomenon of Formless Monastery, the Bodhi Tree Shadow. Senior brother Yongren will definitely be able to enter the first group under the Bodhi Tree. Senior sister Ling has summoned her Jin Dan phenomenon as well. The temperature around Ling Han of Snowdrift Valley dipped and sparkling snowflakes drifted down from the skies. Although every single snowflake seemed weak, it contained a terrifying killing power. Ancient phenomenon, snow pervading everywhere. After releasing the Jin Dan phenomenon, the pressure on the cultivators in the second group was reduced significantly and they gradually increased their speed. However, the dozens of Jining Jinjuan above the clouds had a clearer understanding of the situation. Although the paragons in the second group released their ancient phenomenons, it was still rather difficult for them to catch up to the 8 people in the first group. Although those paragons could make use of their Jin Dan phenomenons to leap a few stone steps rapidly, they were still unable to do so. However, the closer they were to the peak, the greater the pressure they would have to endure. Before long, the speed of the paragons in the second group would slow down. Furthermore, the 8 people in the first group had yet to release their Jin Dan phenomenons. Once the 8 of them released their Jin Dan phenomenons, the gap between them and the cultivators in the second group would widen once more. Rise! Purple Firmament Sect's Wu Feng hollered and channeled his Jin Dan to its limits. His face was shrouded with a red glow that gradually turned purple. In the blink of an eye, his face was filled with a purple glow. All of a sudden, a purple chi drifted over from the east and shrouded Wu Feng. Behind him, an old man riding a green ox faintly appeared. His hair and beard were gray, and although his appearance was blurry, he emitted boundless pressure. Ancient phenomenon, purple chi from the east. Purple chi was the supreme chi and was incomparably noble. Wu Feng's aura skyrocketed and his speed increased as he charged towards the first group. Humph! The eyes of Malevolent Earth Sect's paragon shone coldly as he hollered, unwilling to be left behind. A boundless murderous aura surrounded his body, rumbling and surging. In the blink of an eye, it formed a gigantic sickle. This sickle was as black as ink, like a weapon that came from the depths of hell, capable of harvesting all life. Ancient phenomenon, Earth Malevolent Scythe. Whoosh! Malevolent Earth Sect's paragon pointed forward. This gigantic scythe of earthly malice drew a pitch-black arc in the air, as if it was splitting the void into two. The paragon of Malevolent Earth Sect sprinted along the broken path. Amitabha. The prodigy of Sanskrit temple chanted the name of Buddha as his eyes flickered with the light of wisdom. He formed a special seal with his hands and the power of phenomena surged around him. Behind him, mysterious halos gradually appeared, blooming with a sacred and flawless brilliance. This brilliance illuminated the world, as if it could transcend all living beings. Ancient phenomenon, Buddhist light illumination. Which prodigy who had reached this step wasn't proud and arrogant? Everyone wanted to take a step forward and didn't want to fall behind others. However, the 8 people in the first group were still far ahead. Gradually, as time passed by and they got closer to the peak, Little Fatty, Demoness Ji, Ling Han, Wu Feng and the others in the second group slowed down and were already showing signs of exhaustion. Before long, almost all the cultivators in the second group reached their limits. They were scattered and stood on different stone steps, unable to advance any further. Look, there are 2 paragons on the same stone step. That's right. By the looks of it, there's going to be another tough fight in the ranking battle after the elimination battle. 2 people stood on the 78th stone step. One of them was Demoness Ji and the other was Duan Qingping of Clear Wind Temple. Both of their auras were fluctuating, they were already exhausted. Duan Qingping's gaze scanned Demoness Ji brazenly as he smirked maliciously. Demoness, you're unlucky to have met me. Is that so? Demoness Ji snickered. Please go easy on me later, fellow Taoist. Don't worry. Duan Qingping said lecherously, I'll take good care of you. Although Duan Qingping's tone was teasing and he looked intoxicated, as though he was bewitched, there was a cold glint in the depths of his eyes. There were 2 other people in the second group standing on the same stone step. One of them was Little Fatty and the other was Illusion Fiend Cult's Qin Li. Both of them exchanged glances. Qin Li smiled sinisterly and extended his palm, mimicking a choking motion without concealing the killing intent in his eyes. Little Fatty pouted and looked up. In truth, he still had some strength left but he was not confident of ascending another stone step. Furthermore, the Paragon of Wisdom Monastery was on the stone step above. If he failed to ascend and was severely injured by the power of the Myriad Phenomenon Peak, that would be extremely embarrassing. After pondering for a moment, Little Fatty did not continue forward. This is going to be interesting. We'll be able to see at least 2 battles between paragons. That's right. The battles between paragons are much bloodier. I heard that in the previous ranking battles, there were many paragons who died on the spot. That's for sure. Those paragons are all prideful and won't submit to anyone. If there's a feud between 2 sects, it's only normal for them to fight to the death. The surrounding cultivators discussed fervently with excited expressions. To them, they naturally hoped to be able to watch a few more ranking battles. The positions of the paragons in the second group are already fixed. There shouldn't be much of a change in the rankings. Yes, the basic structure is already set. Right then, someone exclaimed softly and pointed to the Myriad Phenomenon Peak in shock. Look, there's someone else there. That's Su Zimo. The attention of many cultivators was attracted by the 8 people in the first group and the many ancient phenomenons in the second group. They almost forgot about Su Zimo who was taking his time below. No, he seems to be faster than before. Indeed, he's much faster. How can that be? Normally speaking, the closer a cultivator was to the peak, the greater the pressure they were under and their speed would naturally slow down. However, the cultivators present could not understand why Su Zimo's speed was gradually increasing instead, as though he could not feel the pressure from the peak at all. Those cultivators did not know that Su Zimo had already cultivated to the perfected realm of his core formation. His understanding of the Tao of cores had reached a brand new height. He had already comprehended more than half of the traces and auras of the ancient phenomenons on the myriad phenomenon peak, and there was not much left. Furthermore, his speed of comprehension was getting faster as well. Usually, he would be able to sense the mysteries of the immortal, Buddhist and fiend Taoists behind the phenomenons with just a slight perception. Su Zimo's aura turned purer. He gave off a state of returning to simplicity. The dozens of Jining Jinjuan above the clouds were shocked, and they sensed the changes in Su Zimo's body. Their eyes widened in disbelief. Chapter 735. What was cultivation? It was to get rid of the fake and return to the original. That was also the reason why cultivators of the Jin Dan realm were known as perfected beings. However, from ancient times until now, the number of cultivators who were able to comprehend this level of logic was truly too few. It was a process of comprehending the Tao, cultivating and breaking free from the shackles of life and death to seek the true self. Anyone who could comprehend it possessed supreme wisdom. At that moment, Su Zimo followed the footsteps of his predecessors and ascended the ancient path once more. Finally, he managed to fuse the three different Tao auras of the immortal, Buddhist and fiend Taoists perfectly into his Jin Dan and reached the realm of returning to the original. Seems like Tianhuang mainland is truly going to welcome a golden era. Monk Yin Lu lamented, a monster incarnate with such great fortune and wisdom is extremely rare. To think that two of them would appear consecutively in this generation. Diyin has a match now. Fufu. Perfected Lord Hun chuckled with a proud expression and disdain in his eyes as he shook his head. That lad is indeed wise and has great fortune. However, he's still far from being comparable to Diyin. Let's catch up to Diyin first. Right now, he's not even qualified to be compared to Diyin. Monk Yin Lu remained silent. That was because Diyin had already ascended to the peak. On the peak, Diyin stood with his hands behind his back. His figure was faintly discernible between the clouds, and he exuded an insufferably domineering aura as he looked down at the crowd. Diyin was going to leave his name on the ancient phenomenon stele. He was the number one perfected being and lived up to his name. He was also the first in 1,000 years. Although the dozens of Jining Jinjuan present were top-notch cultivators of their respective regions, none of them were able to achieve such accomplishments back then. Diyin's gaze shifted, and he could not help but sneer when he caught sight of Su Zimo, who was still advancing at the back. Clang! Clang! Finally, someone in the first echelon could not withstand the pressure and released the Jin Dan phenomenon. The sound of sword chi buzzing reverberated through the world endlessly. A series of bone-chilling sword beams appeared behind Dugu Jian, blotting out the skies densely as they tore through the air. Heaven covering 10,000 swords. The golden core phenomenon of Sword Tao was created by a mighty figure of the Sword Tao in the ancient era. He was ranked 41st on the previous Jin Dan phenomenon ranking. To think that it would actually have such power when released by Dugu Jian today. Most swordsmen showed their sharpness. Under the influence of the aura, a cold glint flashed in Heng Qiuyu's eyes as he also conjured the Jin Dan phenomenon. Whoosh! Whoosh! The sword chi tore through the air at an extremely fast speed, leaving behind a series of sword marks in the void. It was as if the void had been torn into small cubes. The sword sex legacy phenomenon, startling sword chi. The two sword Tao phenomenons were sharp, slicing the surrounding spiritual energy into pieces. There was no need for the two of them to intentionally control it, but the two sword Tao phenomenons already showed signs of going head-to-head with each other. sword cultivators cultivated their sharpness. The clash between the two great sword cultivators was bound to determine a victor. Hang Qiuyu and Dugu Jian conjured their Jin Dan avatars and headed for the 100th stone step. Immediately after, Su Cheng of Zephyr Thunder Palace conjured his Jin Dan phenomenon as well. One after another, bolts of lightning appeared in midair, forming a bedazzling sea of lightning behind him. 5 divine thunderbolts circled above his head, protecting him within. Apocalyptic 5 thunders. Corpse Mountain. Shura Sect's Ren 2 pointed forward with a cold expression. One after another, corpses that emitted a stench appeared before him. There were countless of them and they were stacked together messily, forming a gigantic mountain. Expressionlessly, Ren 2 stepped on the corpse mountain and continued climbing. I heard that the corpse mountain in the Jin Dan phenomenon is all people who died in the hands of Ren 2. Ah! A cultivator exclaimed and felt chills run down his spine as he asked with a trembling voice, how many people are there? Millions, right? Before he could finish his sentence, Ren 2's voice sounded once more. Blood sea. Splash. Blood flowed from the bottom of the corpse mountain and flooded continuously. In the blink of an eye, it formed a boundless ocean. The seawater was blood red and was filled with an aura of despair, death, and cruelty. The corpse mountain floated in the blood sea. Ren 2 stood on top of the corpse mountain with a torrential ferocity as he crossed the 100th stone step and continued advancing. It's the corpse mountain blood sea. To think that Ren 2 would be able to fuse the corpse mountain and blood sea together as well. I remember that the last person to cultivate to this level was an expert of Shura sect 1,000 years ago. He was also the current Shura of this era. In reality, the corpse mountain and blood sea were 2 ancient phenomenons that were ranked at the top of the phenomenon ranking. The might of the 2 phenomenons fused together was even more terrifying. 1,000 years ago, Shura Yen Beichen ascended to the peak of the myriad phenomenon peak with the corpse mountain blood sea and became the number 1 of the phenomenon ranking. The 8 of them are all rare peerless geniuses. Perfected Lord Luo Shui sighed gently. If this was in the past, any one of the 8 of them would be able to obtain the number 1 spot on the Jin Dan phenomenon ranking. To think that all of them would be gathered together in this generation. Furthermore, there's a monster incarnate that's almost undefeatable above their heads, Di'in. Bang! 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 Monk Zhu Chen, Peng Yu, and Monk Jian Kong released their Jin Dan phenomenons one after another as well. A golden beam of light descended. Monk Zhu Chen's body shone brightly, as though he was plated with a layer of golden foil. A 7-floored pagoda descended with a resplendent glow. It hovered above Monk Jian Kong's head and shone with a divine glow that resembled a waterfall, protecting him within. It was the legacy phenomenon of Hollow Monastery, 7-floored pagoda. The Jin Dan phenomenons were clearly even more terrifying. Compared to the phenomenons such as River Sunset and Galaxy Vortex, they were at least a level stronger. Countless gazes landed on Mingzhen. Of the 8 people in the first group, Mingzhen was the only one who had yet to release his Jin Dan phenomenon. Fufu. Monk Yuan Kong sneered, it's probably some sort of Jin Dan phenomenon that's useless even if he releases it. He might as well hold on. Before his sentence was finished, Mingzhen conjured hand seals with both hands and a terrifying aura emanated from his body. Immediately after, a green lotus flower appeared behind him and hovered in midair, spinning slowly. Every single petal was etched with extremely mysterious and complicated patterns. The petals gradually bloomed. Qinglian bloomed. A series of mysterious halos spread out. A faint fragrance emanated from the center of the lotus platform. The blossoming of Qinglian seemed as though it could cleanse all evil in the world. The moment Qinglian bloomed, be it the corpse mountain blood sea or 7-floored pagoda, the other 7 Jin Dan phenomenons shuddered, as though they were affected significantly. What's that phenomenon? That phenomenon seems familiar, I think I've heard of it somewhere before, ah. Suddenly, a series of exclamations sounded from above the clouds. A few perfected lords of the Buddhist monasteries stood up one after another with starkly changed expressions. They glared at Qinglian behind Ming Zhen with disbelief in their eyes. World-cleansing Qinglian. Monk Yuan Kong spat out those words slowly. The crowd was in an uproar. World-cleansing Qinglian, the legacy phenomenon of Fahua Monastery, was a top-tier Jin Dan phenomenon of the Buddhist monasteries. At its peak, its might was even above the seven-floored pagoda. Chapter 736. That phenomenon was the legacy phenomenon of a super sect that was destroyed 10,000 years ago, Fahua Monastery. One could only comprehend it if they cultivated the number one mystic classic of the core Tao, the Mystic Dharmic Lotus Sutra. As for the Mystic Dharmic Lotus Sutra, it was lost in the catastrophe 10,000 years ago. In the catastrophe 10,000 years ago, Fahua Monastery and Daming Monastery were destroyed and countless cultivation techniques and secret skills were lost. All these years, there have been cultivators searching for those cultivation techniques and secret skills. Nobody expected that this unknown novice monk would be able to cultivate the Jin Dan phenomenon that had been lost for 10,000 years. There was a high chance that this novice monk was inextricably linked to the destroyed Fahua Monastery. Monk Yuan Kong, Monk Wei Fu and the others looked at Ming Zhen with an inexplicable glint in their eyes, resembling hungry ferocious beasts that had spotted food. Monk Yin Lu frowned slightly and revealed a hint of worry. A man's wealth was his own ruin. Ming Zhen's world-cleansing Qinglian was bound to attract many covetous eyes. As the 8 people in the first group released their Jin Dan phenomenons, the gap between them gradually widened and the victor was decided. Shura Sect's Ren Tu was at the front. He had already reached the 105th stone step. That was a rather terrifying height. The previous number 1 of the Jin Dan phenomenon ranking, Di'in, merely stopped at the 99th stone step. The fact that Ren Tu could reach that height proved that he was at least stronger than Di'in 100 years ago. Unfortunately, Di'in suppressed his cultivation for 100 years and continued to comprehend the power of the Jin Dan realm. The reason why he returned was because he wanted to take the number 1 spot of the phenomenon ranking once more and suppress all the paragons. Ah! Ren Tu reared his head and roared into the skies. His blood qi surged and green veins popped up on his neck like spirit snakes, his expression was menacing and unyielding. He wanted to climb to the peak. He was indignant. He was not willing to be beneath anyone. However, the pressure from the peak was way too terrifying. Even climbing another stone step was as difficult as ascending the heavens for him, let alone climbing to the peak. Di'in stood with his hands behind his back and looked down at the struggling Ren Tu with a mocking gaze. One of them was hysterical. One of them was indifferent. One of them stood below. One of them stood at the peak of the mountain. This scene formed a strong contrast. It was the same for Zephyr Thunder Palace's Su Cheng, Monk Jian Kong, Pang Yu, and the others. It was as if a monarch was looking down on the common people. No matter how the common people struggled, they were unable to break through the monarch's pressure. Sighs came from the crowd. It had to be said that being born in the same era as Di'in was a tragedy for these paragons. Gradually, Butcher lowered his head. He was already exhausted. The 105th stone step was his limit. It seemed that there were only 3 stone steps left to reach the peak of the mountain. However, these 3 stone steps were even greater than the distance between heaven and earth. Suddenly, exclamations came from the crowd below. The stone steps under Butcher's feet shook violently. Ren Tu glanced sideways, killing intent surging in his eyes. Not far away from him, Zephyr Thunder Palace's Su Cheng had actually reached the 105th stone step with his 5 lightnings apocalypse. Su Cheng gasped for breath, and he was already sweating profusely. There was a commotion in the crowd. This meant that the 2 paragons would be clashing in the ranking battle soon. The Corpse Mountain Blood Sea and Five Lightnings Apocalypse would also have a showdown. He he he. A sinister laughter came from Butcher's mouth that sent chills down one's spine. Su Cheng sneered against Butcher's killing intent without fear. At their level, they would not back down unless they were facing an unbeatable opponent like Dian. Butcher wanted to kill Su Cheng. Su Cheng wanted to gain fame by suppressing Butcher as well. Below Ren Tu and Su Cheng was Monk Jian Kong of Xiankong Temple. 104th Stone Step. This was already Monk Jian Kong's limit. Monk Jian Kong looked at Ren Tu and Su Cheng above his head, his eyes filled with unwillingness. Before entering the ancient battlefield, he wanted to compete with Dian. It was only when Dian ascended the peak that he realized the difference between the two of them. However, in Monk Jian Kong's opinion, he would definitely be in the top 3 of the phenomenon ranking. To think that he would have to settle for 4th place now. Hurry, look. There's going to be another huge battle. This is going to be interesting. It's a fight between the Buddhist monasteries. A commotion broke out in the crowd once more. Monk Jian Kong subconsciously turned his head to look. Similarly, there was another person on the 104th stone step. It was the novice monk named Mingzhen. A blooming green lotus floated behind Mingzhen. Although it looked ordinary, it emitted an extremely terrifying aura. Monk Jian Kong's pupils constricted. Prior to this, he did not take this novice monk seriously at all. But now, it seemed like it was still unknown if he would be 4th on the phenomenon ranking. Mingzhen did not even look at Monk Jian Kong. He merely raised his head and looked at the 105th stone step with a calm expression. After pausing for a moment, he continued forward. What is he trying to do? Is he trying to ascend another stone step? It's no wonder why it's the #1 mystic classic of core formation. Many cultivators were dumbfounded when they noticed Mingzhen's actions. However, Mingzhen had just climbed halfway when his body swayed and he fell back onto the 104th stone step with a dull grunt. Fu. Monk Jian Kong could not help but scoff coldly, "You overestimate yourself." Mingzhen clutched his chest and a trace of blood seeped out from the corner of his lips. He merely glanced at Monk Jian Kong indifferently without arguing. Monk Yin Lu sighed gently. Humph. Perfected Lord Luo Shui glanced at Monk Yuan Kong and remarked coldly, "Just now, if not for the fact that someone bullied him and injured him, he would have probably reached the 105th stone step by now." Many cultivators suddenly recalled as well. Before the fight for the phenomenon ranking, Monk Yuan Kong made use of Sanskrit to injure Mingzhen. Mingzhen ascended the myriad phenomenon peak with injuries. Below Monk Jian Kong and Mingzhen, there were 2 other people on the 103rd stone step. Hang Qiuyu of Sword Sect and Dugu Jian of the Dugu clan. There had to be a victor between these 2 sword cultivators. This fight for the phenomenon ranking was far more intense than everyone had imagined. Just the top 10 ranking battles alone, there were as many as 3. This was rare in the past fights for the phenomenon ranking. Behind the 2 of them, Peng Yu of Overlord Palace was on the 102nd stone step. On the 101st stone step was Monk Zhu Chen of Diamond Monastery. All 8 of them in the first group had surpassed the 100th stone step. The fight for the phenomenon ranking this time round is truly unusually intense. There are so many peerless paragons that are clashing together. Hee, place your bets, place your bets. There's no doubt that the #1 of the phenomenon ranking is already here. Let's guess who exactly is the 2nd on the phenomenon rankings, the 4th on the phenomenon rankings, and the... Before the cultivator could finish, he swept his gaze and his mouth opened gradually as his gaze froze on the myriad phenomenon peak. What's wrong? A cultivator asked and followed the gaze of the person. We seem to have forgotten someone. The cultivator could not conceal his shock. On the myriad phenomenon peak, a figure was ascending rapidly, surpassing one figure after another and soaring into the skies. 90th stone step. 91st stone step. 98th stone step. After the 100th stone step, the speed of the figure showed no signs of slowing down and was still advancing. Chapter 737. This person is truly terrifying. He did not release his Jin Dan phenomenon for the first 100 stone steps and merely charged up with his body alone. Rumor has it that this person's body is comparable to pure-blooded ferocious beasts. Indeed, he lives up to his reputation. It's nothing much. Dean only released his Jin Dan phenomenon after the 100th stone step as well. At that moment, countless gazes were fixated on the green figure on the myriad phenomenon peak. As everyone discussed, Su Zimo had already reached the 100th stone step. Boom! The moment he stepped onto the stone step, Su Zimo's eyes lit up and he frowned slightly. After the 100th stone step, the pressure from above increased exponentially. Even with his physique, he could not withstand it. Of course, that was under the premise that he did not use the power of his inner core. Su Zimo estimated that if he used the power of his inner core and released his blood qi, he would be able to reach the peak of the myriad phenomenon peak even without releasing his Jin Dan phenomenon. Of course, that was not realistic. Perfected Lord Yujun had warned him that using the power of his inner core on the myriad phenomenon peak was equivalent to courting death. Crack! 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 Above Su Zimo's head, the skies suddenly split open. Lightning flashed and thunder rumbled as rain poured, forming a torrential torrent with countless meteors raining down. It was as though the apocalypse had arrived. Bang! 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 Four gigantic stone pillars stood in the torrent. At the top of the stone pillars was a shell that covered the skies. A series of mysterious patterns were etched on it as though they contained the secrets of heaven and earth. Its four legs suppressed the raging tides while its shell supported the broken heavens. The primordial divine turtle descended with a bright gaze and roared into the skies. For most of the cultivators present, it was their first time witnessing that phenomenon personally, and their expressions changed as endless shock filled their eyes. That primordial phenomenon had been lost for a long time. Even the dozens of Jining Jinjuan present had not witnessed it personally. It's no wonder why it's a primordial divine being that protects the masses. To think that it possesses such might. Monk Yin Lu lamented. Perfected Lord Luo Shui said darkly, the human race will definitely prosper with the reappearance of this lost primordial phenomenon. Perfected Lord Hun Yi and Monk Yuan Kong merely smirked coldly in disapproval. Perfected Lord Yujun was expressionless, but there was a hint of worry in the depths of his eyes. The appearance of these primeval phenomena meant that a golden era had descended, and it was very likely that an unimaginable calamity was silently approaching. If they made it through, the human race would prosper. If they couldn't make it through, the human race would most likely be wiped out. In the Antiquity Age, the rise of many emperors, and the appearance of the human emperor, a terrifying existence that was feared throughout the ages, created the current situation of Tianhuang region. Now, all the emperors had passed away and the human sovereign had left Tianhuang long ago. If the human race really faced a catastrophe, who would save them? Maybe I'm worrying too much. Perfected Lord Yujun shook his head and laughed self-deprecatingly. After summoning the primordial divine turtle, the pressure on Su Zimo's body lessened and he arrived at the 101st stone step. Without stopping, he surpassed Monk Ju Chen and continued forward. Level 102, Level 103. Just like that, Monk Ju Chen, Peng Yu, and Heng Qiuyu watched as Su Zimo overtook them. The three of them had conflicted expressions. 20 years ago, in the battle beneath the human emperor's palace, the paragons of the immortal, Buddhist and fiend sects were either killed or injured. Most of them were dispirited and could not recover from the setback, vanishing from the masses. The three of them were the only ones who managed to sever their mental demons and stood up once more. They fought their way back to the position of the top disciples of the Jin Dan realm of their sects. A large part of the reason why they returned this time round was to avenge their past humiliation. They wanted to fight another round with Su Zimo. However, Su Zimo did not give them the chance at all. On the myriad phenomenon peak, this person had easily surpassed them. Everyone knew that Su Zimo possessed a double phenomenon. Right now, he had already reached this stage with a single phenomenon. If he could summon two phenomenons, where could he go? Could he truly be on par with Diin? The surroundings of the myriad phenomenon peak turned silent. Many cultivators wanted to know how far Su Zimo could go. Diin looked down at Su Zimo expressionlessly from above. Bang! Su Zimo ascended the 105th stone step. Su Cheng was shocked and glared at Su Zimo with widened eyes. Dozens of days ago, he had fought against Su Zimo. At that time, Su Zimo released his double phenomenon and fused them together to destroy his apocalyptic five thunders. But now, Su Zimo had reached this stage with a single Jin Dan phenomenon. This meant that in a short dozens of days, the power of Su Zimo's Jin Dan phenomenon had increased by another level. Su Cheng's guess was both right and wrong. Indeed, the power of Su Zimo's Jin Dan phenomenon had increased. However, it was not in the past dozens of days, but during the journey of ascending the myriad phenomenon peak. He was comprehending the traces and auras left behind by ancient experts on the myriad phenomenon peak, comprehending the dermic formulations of the immortal, Buddhist and fiend sects as well as the profoundness of the Qi condensation, foundation establishment and Jin Dan realms. His Jin Dan phenomenon had already been reborn. Others might not be able to sense the change, but Su Zimo knew it best. Standing on the 105th stone step, Su Zimo closed his eyes and paused for a moment. All of a sudden, Su Zimo opened his eyes and roared into the skies. The Jin Dan within his body circulated and another scorching aura burst forth. Rumble. Boom. The mountains collapsed and volcanoes spewed. Scarlet lava filled the ground and flames burned for thousands of kilometers. A gigantic anaconda burrowed out from the depths of the ground and leaped into the air, flapping its red and almost transparent wings as it hissed into the skies. The primordial soaring serpent. Two primordial phenomenons have descended. Su Zimo's aura surged as he stomped heavily on the ground and soared into the skies like a sharp arrow, crossing the 106th step, 107th step, boom. It was done in a single breath. With his double phenomenon, Su Zimo ascended to the peak of the myriad phenomenon peak right away. Ah! After a brief silence, a series of exclamations broke out from the crowd. The change happened too quickly and many cultivators could not react in time. In the blink of an eye, another person appeared on the peak of the myriad phenomenon peak. The peak was 18,000 feet tall and was surrounded by clouds. Two figures could be seen faintly within, like peerless emperors patrolling the mortal realm. Many cultivators were extremely excited. The fact that both of them were standing on the peak meant that they were about to have an earth-shaking battle in the ranking battle. Heis! Perfected Lord Yujun sighed internally. As a cultivator of Enigma Palace who was in charge of the phenomenon ranking, this was the last thing he wanted to see. The loss of either one of these two peerless paragons would not be a blessing for the human race. On the peak, Diin looked at Su Zimo beside him and smirked, saying with a fake smile, "Look at this beautiful world. Look at this world and the skies. Enjoy the admiring gazes of other cultivators. That's the last thing you'll be able to enjoy." "Is that so?" Su Zimo asked indifferently with a calm expression. "Su Zimo, you're truly ignorant. Do you know what the peak of the myriad phenomenon peak means to you?" Diin pointed beneath his feet and smiled sinisterly. "This is your gates of hell. The fact that you've ascended to the peak means that you've stepped into the gates of hell. Since you want to die, I can only grant you your wish." Chapter 738. In the face of Di Yin's provocation, Su Zimo merely scoffed coldly. There was no longer any room for negotiation between the two of them, and they were bound to fight to the death later on. There was no point in saying anything else. Unlike at the bottom of the mountain, the moment Su Zimo ascended to the peak, he could no longer feel any pressure from the myriad phenomenon peak. It was as though he had already obtained the recognition of the ancient mountain. Su Zimo turned around and surveyed his surroundings. The peak of the mountain was quite spacious, and there was nothing to see. There was only a tall stone tablet standing in the middle. There were hundreds of names written on it. Standing before the stone stele, Su Zimo remained silent with mixed emotions. There was joy, pride, and a hint of disappointment. Countless years had passed since the ancient era, and the phenomenon ranking had never stopped. It was updated once every 100 years. However, there were only a few hundred cultivators who managed to ascend to the peak. From this day forth, his name would be engraved on the stone stele as well. No matter how much time passed, it would remain eternal. He should be proud and happy. The only disappointment was that he could not share this joy with someone else. Without that person, he would not even have the chance to cultivate, let alone leave his name on the ancient phenomenon stele. It seems like I'm closer to you now. Standing before the stone stele, Su Zimo lowered his head and murmured to himself with a faint smile. Although he was still very far away from that illusory world, he firmly believed that he would be able to reach there one day and catch up to that person. Both of you, gather your spirit energy and leave your names on the ancient phenomenon stele, perfected Lord Yujun's voice sounded. Su Zimo and Di Yin did as they were told and wrote their names on the stone stele. The styles of the words on the stone stele were different. Some were sharp, some were reserved, some were powerful, some were graceful, some were simple and dignified, while some were wild. Through those words, it was as though one could see the splendor of many predecessors. The cultivators standing at the foot of the mountain revealed looks of envy. The Jin Dan phenomenon ranking would change once every 100 years. However, the ancient phenomenon stele remained here for all eternity. Cultivators who can enter myriad phenomenon city are all worthy of being called paragons. Suddenly, perfected Lord Yujun said slowly, today's achievements do not necessarily represent the future. Everyone, you should work hard and not slack off. Leaving one's name on the ancient phenomenon stele might not necessarily prove how far one could go in the future. Among these hundreds of cultivators, there were many who died prematurely. All geniuses would be envied by the heavens. He would definitely experience unimaginable hardships and dangers. As for the cultivators who did not leave their names on the ancient phenomenon stele, there were also people who became emperors in the future. Nothing is absolute. Perfected Lord Yujun continued, the elimination battle is over and the new phenomenon ranking is out. After the cultivators on it take a break, the final ranking battle will begin. The ranking battle was held on a stone platform at the foot of the mountain. The stone platform was 10 feet tall and extremely spacious, enough for tens of thousands of people to stand on at the same time. There were a total of 18 matches in the ranking battles this time. Of course, the most eye-catching one was the fight for the top 10 of the phenomenon ranking. The final battle was between Su Zimo and Di Yin for the top spot. After the elimination battle, the cultivators on the phenomenon ranking needed to rest and recover their strength. Apart from Ji Qingtian, in Su Zimo's group, Little Fatty, Demoness Ji, and Ming Zhen were all fighting against another paragon for the final ranking battle. Little Fatty was up against Qin Li of Illusion Fiend Cult of the Fiend sections. Demoness Ji was up against Duan Qingping of Clear Wind Temple of the Immortal sections. Ming Zhen was up against Monk Jian Kong of Hollow Monastery of the Buddhist monasteries. The fact that they were on the same stone step meant that their phenomenons were similar. However, strength was not the only thing that mattered in a fight between cultivators. There were also many techniques, spirit arts, secret skills, and even experience. Little monk, have this elixir. Xiaoning arrived beside Ming Zhen and handed him an elixir. Previously, Ming Zhen was injured by Monk Yuan Kong and climbed the myriad phenomenon peak with injuries. Now that his injuries worsened, Xiaoning made such a move because she could tell of his condition. Take it and heal up as soon as possible so that you can fight with all your might. Su Zimo nodded. Although he had many elixirs in his storage bag, Elixir Yang Sect's elixirs were still the best in terms of quality and effects. Ming Zhen cultivated a cultivation technique of the Buddhist monasteries. His regeneration speed was shocking. After consuming the elixir and adjusting his breathing, his injuries would be mostly healed before the battle. Thank you, patron. Ming Zhen received the elixir and swallowed it. The ranking battle had begun just after noon. In order to prevent paragons from dying in the ranking battle, as long as a cultivator was defeated and left the vicinity of the stone platform in time, it would be considered as admitting defeat. The battle would end immediately. The first battle was for the 98th rank of the phenomenon ranking. The two paragons fighting were from the upper sections. Although they were towards the bottom of the phenomenon ranking, the battle was unusually intense as well. Many spirit arts and secret skills were released by the two paragons one after another. Melee combat and ranged attacks were endless. Eventually, both paragons released Jin Dan phenomenons and fought to the point of exhaustion before one of them won the battle with a slight advantage. The cultivators below felt that their horizons were broadened. Through the fights between the paragons, they were able to gain a lot as well. As time passed by, 12 battles were over as evening approached. The next battle was for the 20th rank of the phenomenon ranking. The two paragons were Demoness Ji and Duan Qingping. On the stone platform, Demoness Ji bowed and smiled gently at Duan Qingping. Her eyes rippled as she said gently, "Brother Duan, please." Duan Qingping froze for a moment with a hint of confusion in his eyes. Immediately after, he frowned with a conflicted expression and began to tremble uncontrollably. "What's wrong with Duan Qingping? I didn't see Demoness Ji attack." A series of exclamations sounded from the crowd. Su Zimo nodded to himself. Demoness Ji's bewitchment technique was getting more and more proficient and terrifying. Apart from the paragons of the Buddhist monasteries who had no worldly desires, any other cultivator would be bewitched if they were careless against Demoness Ji. Ah! 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 Duan Qingping's eyes widened as he looked around and hollered. Black wind calamity. A series of hurricanes circled around Duan Qingping's body. They were pitch black and howled in a shuddering manner. If the hurricanes were to hit a cultivator, their flesh would be blown off instantly. It was extremely powerful. Realizing that something was amiss, Duan Qingping released his Jin Dan phenomenon right away. Unfortunately, he had already lost the initiative and his mind was bewitched. Even if he released his Jin Dan phenomenon, it would be difficult for his mind to break free and regain clarity. Demoness Ji stood at the side and watched coldly without attacking at all. Duan Qingping was like a headless fly as he howled on the stone platform like a lunatic. It was as though he could not see Demoness Ji and had completely lost his mind. Humph! When he saw that, the perfected Lord of Clear Wind Temple had a terrible expression. Given the current situation, there was no longer a need for Demoness Ji to attack. Before long, Duan Qingping would be exhausted and die from exhaustion. The outcome was clear. There was no bloodshed. Demoness Ji did not even release her Jin Dan phenomenon. Chapter 739. The next battle was for the 14th place of the phenomenon ranking. Little Fatty against Illusion Fiend Cult's Qin Li. Illusion Fiend Cult's cultivation technique focuses on mental influence. Be careful. Demoness Ji, who had just walked down, reminded Little Fatty kindly. Little Fatty, Demoness Ji, Ji Qingtian, Shi Jian, and the others belonged to different sections. In fact, immortals and fiends were on opposing sides and did not interact with one another. However, at that moment, the group of people seemed to have gathered around Suzimo. "Thank you," little fatty thanked her. If this was before they entered the astral dragon's sputum lair, little fatty's Acheron phenomenon would not have been able to get this ranking. It would be difficult for him to even get into the top 50 of the phenomenon ranking, let alone the top 20. Right now, little fatty had already obtained the recognition of the Acheron diagram. Although he had not cultivated an essence spirit and could not control this ancient dermic weapon, his Acheron phenomenon was no longer what it was in the past and had undergone a complete transformation. The two of them stood on the stone platform. Qin Li's eyes lit up and a series of terrifying scenes appeared behind him. Countless living beings were tied to scorching copper pillars and their flesh sizzled from the heat. Green smoke billowed and the living beings on the pillars struggled endlessly. On the other side, a gigantic stone mill appeared in the voids. Billions of living beings were sucked into the stone mill and spun bit by bit. Their flesh and bones were crushed and fresh blood splattered all over the ground. Although the flesh of those living beings was crushed, their consciousnesses were still present. In the blink of an eye, the shattered flesh reassembled and was sucked into the stone mill once more. They were crushed once more and endured the torturous pain all the time. Cycle after cycle, endless reincarnation. Many cultivators felt chills run down their spines and their minds wavered when they saw that ancient phenomenon, boundless hell. A series of hellish scenes appeared behind Qin Li in a sinister and terrifying manner. Acheron. Little fatty pointed forward with a grim expression. Behind him, a surging yellow river appeared. There were corpses bobbing up and down in it, as well as ghosts struggling. The yellow springs surged forward and drowned the limitless underworld behind Qin Li. The many living beings of boundless hell were truly freed after entering Acheron and no longer had to endure the endless torturous pain. Crack. 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 The Azura hell was on the verge of collapse, and a series of cracking sounds could be heard. Qin Li's face was pale as he retreated and left the stone platform in time. "Thank you." Little fatty heaved a sigh of relief and retracted his golden core phenomenon. He cupped his fists from afar and chuckled. After this battle, there were only 4 phenomenon ranking battles left. Next was the Battle of the Sword Dao. As the number 1 legacy disciple of Sword Sect at the Golden Core realm, Hang Qiuyu naturally had to protect the glory of Sword Sect. Heavens above him, heavens, and heavens, heavens, heavens above heavens, 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 heavens. Heavens above, heavens, heavens. Hang Qiuyu believed that he would not lose as well. How could the ancient phenomenon of Sword Sect, startling sword qi, not be a match for this person's heavens blanketing sword? The two of them stood on the stone platform. Before they fought, Sword Sect's Jining Jinjuan asked first, "Are you willing to join Sword Sect?" Many cultivators in the surroundings revealed envious expressions. Dugu Jian had already obtained the recognition of one of the immortal sects, Sword Sect, before he even fought against Hang Qiuyu. Sword Sect was a place of pilgrimage for all sword cultivators in the world. Countless cultivation techniques and secret skills of the Tao of the Sword were collected in Sword Sect throughout the history of the cultivation world. Sword Sect was a place that every sword cultivator dreamed of seeking the Tao. On the stone platform, Dugu Jian's expression was calm when he heard Sword Sect's invitation and he merely shook his head gently without any hint of joy. A commotion broke out in the crowd. He rejected it. Dugu Jian rejected Sword Sect's invitation without hesitation. "Young man, let me remind you that you can only comprehend the true Tao of the sword in Sword Sect." Sword Sect's perfected lord frowned slightly and pondered for a moment before speaking again. "It wasn't easy for you to get to where you are today. I can tell that your potential in the Tao of the sword is decent, so I can give you another chance." Dugu Jian merely looked at the sword in his hands and shook his head once more. It was as though there was nothing else in his eyes apart from the sword in his hands. He did not believe in sects or gentry clans. He only believed in the sword in his hands. Dugujian's aura was incompatible with everyone else and there was an incomprehensible loneliness about him. Sword cultivators as such were the scariest. They were pure, clean and had no other thoughts. Sword Sect's perfected lord was expressionless and said nothing more. The battle had already begun. Buzz! Buzz! Almost at the same time. Dugujian and Heng Qiuyu attacked at the same time. Two incomparably stunning sword lights flashed in midair and vanished instantly at an extremely fast speed. Immediately after, two streaks of blood appeared. Both of them were injured at the same time. It was too fast. Many cultivators could not react in time. The moment the two sword lights made contact, both of them were injured. Heng Qiuyu's right leg and Dugujian's left arm were struck. The two sword wounds were extremely deep and dyed their clothes red instantly. Those sword wounds were accompanied by extremely strong sword qi. The sword qi in the wounds had to be purged for the wounds to heal. However, neither of them had the chance to do so in such a tense exchange nor did they dare to be distracted. The killing power of sword cultivators was the most frightening. Any slight distraction could lead to their deaths. Both of them attacked at almost the same time. Clang! 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 Their swords collided repeatedly in midair with a series of metallic sounds and sparks flying everywhere. 3 breaths later, their figures intersected and separated once more. A series of exclamations sounded from the crowd. Both of them had more than 10 wounds on their bodies. They were shallow and deep. Some of them even revealed the white bones inside, and the bones were almost cut off. Dugujian could not defend against Heng Qiuyu's sword. As for Heng Qiuyu, he could not defend against Dugujian's sharpness as well. Both of them were drenched in blood and their blood qi was deteriorating. If this continued, the outcome would be unpredictable and might be decided in the blink of an eye. Startling sword qi. Heng Qiuyu released Sword Sect's legacy phenomenon and a dense sword qi appeared behind him. It was extremely sharp and shot towards Dugujian. At the same time, Heng Qiuyu bit the tip of his tongue gently and spat out a stream of essence blood that scattered on the sword qi. The power of his phenomenon intensified. Instantly, Heng Qiuyu's expression wilted. That was a secret skill of Sword Sect, and spitting out that stream of essence blood consumed an immense amount of essence qi. He would not have released it unless it was extremely important. The voids were torn apart by the startling sword qi one after another. The moment Dugujian's 10,000 swords cover the heavens was released, it was already riddled with holes by the startling sword qi and shattered. Why aren't you leaving? Many cultivators frowned. Now that Jin Dan's phenomenon was shattered, Dugujian no longer had any means to defend against it. If he continued to linger on the stone platform, he would definitely be minced by the startling sword qi mercilessly. There was no hint of fear or retreat in Dugujian's eyes as he looked at the incoming sword qi. At this juncture of life and death, he seemed to have comprehended something and his aura was changing. The startling sword qi that pierced towards Dugujian slowed down gradually. Heng Qiuyu's eyes widened in shock and anger. His Jin Dan phenomenon was no longer under his control. Right in front of countless gazes, the sword qi descended in front of Dugujian one after another, as though they were submitting to him. Sword Sect's perfected lord's expression changed starkly as he exclaimed, "All swords converge." Chapter 740. All swords converge was an invincible phenomenon of the Tao of the sword. All swords converge could suppress all phenomenons of the Tao of the sword without exception. Back then, the Sword Emperor of Tianhuang mainland cultivated all swords converge. He wielded control over all the swords in the world and all swords submitted to him wherever he went. Since ancient times, there were no more than 10 cultivators in the Sword Sect who had cultivated the all-returning swords phenomenon. However, all 10 of them eventually became top experts who dominated their respective regions. On the stone platform, the power of Dugu Jian's phenomenon was about to dissipate. However, in the blink of an eye, an even stronger power descended. Thousands of startling sword chi danced in midair and streaked, leaving behind a series of blazing beams of light that were extremely sharp. However, they could not hurt Dugu Jian at all. Just as the sword chi was about to pierce Dugu Jian, they changed directions nimbly and circled around him. Dugu Jian stood in the middle of the dense sword chi, his sharpness becoming more and more intense. Although his eyes were empty and lifeless, his gaze was like two sharp swords. Hang Qiuyu's pupils constricted as he sensed danger. Not good. Hang Qiuyu was alarmed and released his sex sword escape technique without hesitation, speeding out of the stone platform. Shoo! A bedazzling sword beam flashed and disappeared. Hang Qiuyu was no longer on the stone platform. His movement technique's speed was truly shocking. Some of the super sects of the cultivation world possessed some secret escape techniques. For example, Su Cheng, who escaped from Su Zimo earlier on, released the escape technique of Zephyr Thunder Palace, Zephyr Thunder Escape. Some of the superior escape techniques could match Jining Jinjuan's speed for a short period of time and might even surpass it. Blood escape that Su Zimo cultivated was one of them. Clang! 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 Under Dugu Jian's control, thousands of startling sword chi tore through the air and pierced the spot where Hang Qiuyu disappeared, leaving a series of sword scars. Victory was decided after Hang Qiuyu left the stone platform. For paragon cultivators like them, it was extremely difficult to kill them if they were bent on escaping. Without saying a word, Dugu Jian leaped off the stone platform. Jining Jinjuan of the sword sect looked at Dugu Jian's back and frowned slightly, deep in thought. There were only 3 matches left in the ranking battles. The next battle was between Monk Jian Kong and Ming Zhen. Monk Yuan Kong looked down at Ming Zhen from above and suddenly asked, "Ming Zhen, where did you obtain the mystic Dharmic Lotus Sutra?" Ming Zhen frowned and did not reply immediately. Although he was inexperienced, he was not stupid. At the side, Monk Wei Fu of Diamond Monastery used the Sanskrit technique of the Buddhist sects and asked with a booming voice, "Ming Zhen, let me ask you. What are the 5 precepts of Buddhism?" Ming Zhen's expression was solemn as he said in a deep voice, "Don't kill, don't steal, don't lust, don't spout nonsense and don't drink." "All right." Monk Wei Fu nodded and said, "Since you know not to speak nonsense, you should also know not to speak nonsense and not to lie. Let me ask you, where did you learn the mystic Dharmic Lotus Sutra? Who taught you that?" Monk Yin Lu frowned when he heard that. It went without saying that Monk Wei Fu and Monk Yuan Kong wanted to get their hands on the mystic Dharmic Lotus Sutra. However, Monk Wei Fu's methods were even more brilliant. He used the 5 precepts of Buddhism to seal Ming Zhen's escape route and forced him to reveal the secret of the mystic Dharmic Lotus Sutra. In other words, Monk Wei Fu was warning Ming Zhen that he was a monk and could not lie. Ming Zhen's expression was calm as he said in a deep voice, "About the mystic Dharmic Lotus Sutra." At that point, Ming Zhen paused for a moment. Even the other Jining Jinjuan pricked up their ears secretly, waiting for Ming Zhen's answer, let alone Monk Yuan Kong and Monk Wei Fu. If they could obtain any useful clues from this, they might be able to track down the countless cultivation techniques and secret skills of Fa Hua Monastery. "Hurry and speak," Monk Yuan Kong urged. "Where's the mystic Dharmic Lotus Sutra?" Ming Zhen placed his palms together and said seriously, "Monks don't lie. I don't want to talk about the mystic Dharmic Lotus Sutra." The entire place went silent. Monk Yuan Kong and Monk Wei Fu froze instantly. What did he mean by not wanting to talk about it? The two of them had never expected that Ming Zhen would say something like that despite all their calculations. The little fox couldn't hold it in any longer and burst into laughter. Indeed, Ming Zhen was not lying, he simply did not want to talk about it. A simple statement was enough to resolve the difficulties and interrogation of the 2 perfected lords of the Buddhist monasteries. "Truly, you have a glib tongue. Monk Yuan Kong's expression darkened as he said in a deep voice, "Jian Kong, teach this little monk a lesson and show him the true methods of the Buddhist monasteries." Monk Jian Kong nodded and looked at Ming Zhen with a cold gaze. "Little monk, defeat him." Ji Qingtian, Little Fatty, and the others were cheering for Ming Zhen. Su Zimo did not say anything. He was not worried about this battle. Ming Zhen was the successor of two super sects, Fahua Monastery and Daming Monastery. At the very least, no one of the same cultivation realm could compare to Ming Zhen in terms of comprehension of Buddhism and methods of the Buddhist monasteries. On the stone platform. Without a second word, Monk Jian Kong released his Jin Dan phenomenon right away. Boom! In midair, a gigantic Buddhist pagoda descended slowly with a terrifying might. It shone brightly, as though it could suppress all evil. There were a total of 7 floors to the pagoda and there were dazzling Sanskrit engraved on it. 7-floor pagoda. A pagoda was a Buddhist pagoda. In the Buddhist monasteries, a 7-floor pagoda was the highest. There were a total of 3 levels to Hollow Monastery's legacy phenomenon. 3-floor pagoda, 5-floor pagoda and the highest level 7-floor pagoda. Throughout history, all those who could cultivate a 7-floor pagoda were monks who possessed great wisdom of the Buddhist monasteries. Monk Jian Kong assumed a lotus position and formed hand seals repeatedly. A series of spirit energy Buddhist lights burst forth from his fingertips and entered the 7-floor pagoda. The 7-floor pagoda shone brightly. Buzz! Boom! As the 7-floor pagoda descended, a series of Sanskrit sounds echoed from the pagoda, causing one's heart to shudder and want to prostrate in worship subconsciously. If that was the case for the surrounding cultivators, it was obvious how much pressure Ming Zhen was under on the stone platform. Ba. With a calm expression, Ming Zhen lowered his head slightly and placed his palms together, chanting a Buddhist proclamation softly. Behind him, a Qinglian appeared and bloomed silently with a Buddhist light that seemed like it could cleanse all evil in the world. The Qinglian rose slowly and blocked the descent of the 7-floor pagoda. Creak! 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 The two Buddhist phenomenons collided. Although there was no earth-shaking sound, the entire stone platform shook. Although the 7-floor pagoda was strong, it could not do anything to the pure and flawless Qinglian. Monk Jian Kong widened his eyes and channeled spirit energy continuously, his face was already contorted slightly. As for Ming Zhen, he placed his palms together and lowered his gaze, chanting Buddhist scriptures softly. This scene was similar to the daily cultivation at the bottom of the Dragon Burial Valley. Su Zimo said softly, "Jian Kong has lost." Jian Kong wanted to win too badly. Instead, he was at a disadvantage in terms of mentality. However, Ming Zhen maintained his usual mentality. To fight or not to fight. To fight or not to fight. It was clear who was superior. Boom! There was a deafening sound. The 7-floor pagoda had already dissipated but the Qinglian was still around. Monk Jian Kong fell onto the stone platform with a pale expression. Ming Zhen stood up and bowed his head slightly in acknowledgement. Then, he floated away. Chapter 741. After that battle, there were only 2 ranking battles left. Those 2 battles would determine the top 4 of the phenomenon ranking. The next battle was between Ren Tu of Shura sect and Su Cheng of Zephyr Thunder Palace. The battle between the 2 of them was even more intense. Those 2 paragons almost represented the peak of the immortal and fiend sects in the Jin Dan realm. After 1,000 years, a cultivator of Shura sect managed to fuse the Corpse Mountain and Blood Sea together to release a terrifying might. As for Zephyr Thunder Palace, Su Cheng was one of the few paragons who could cultivate apocalyptic 5 thunders as well. The cultivation techniques and secret skills of the immortal and fiend sects were endless in the hands of the 2 of them. On the stone platform, lightning flashed in a bedazzling manner and a sea of blood surged with a nauseating stench. Although the power of thunder had an obvious suppressive effect against evil fiends, Rentu's methods were too terrifying. However, Rentu's methods of the fiend's sex were way too terrifying. There were thousands of vengeful spirits circling around him with a sinister aura that even the power of thunder could not purge. The two of them had met their match. The two of them fought for a long time and almost exhausted themselves before Rentu won with a Pyrrhic victory. The end of that battle meant that most of the rankings of the new Jin Dan phenomenon ranking were already confirmed. There was only one final battle left. Everyone was watching. Today, one of them was destined to achieve unparalleled fame. Dean opened his eyes with a deep gaze. It was as though he had fused into the world and his aura turned ethereal, chaotic and unfathomable. Just because Dean was resting with his eyes closed for the ranking battle right now, he did not watch at all. Be it Monk Jian Kong, Ming Zhen, Ren Tu, and Su Cheng, none of their fights were worthy of his attention. It was only at that moment that Dean finally stood up slowly. A domineering aura that looked down on the world was released and many cultivators present were shocked. Even Ren Tu, Su Cheng, and the others frowned when they saw Dean at that moment, feeling a sense of helplessness rising in their hearts. It was way too frightening. Before he even attacked, he already gave off such a terrifying pressure. Ever since Dean became the number one of the phenomenon ranking 100 years ago, almost no one had seen him attack. This was because there were not many cultivators who were worthy of his attention. To think that a monster incarnate would appear out of nowhere more than 20 years ago and leave his name on the ancient phenomenon stele just like him, immortal through the ages. Be careful. Lin Xuanji reminded with a voice transmission, I heard from the seniors of the sect that this person is not only terrifyingly talented, he is also blessed with fortune and obtained the legacy of the human emperor in a ruin. It's said that this is a complete Pil Dao inheritance. Apart from many secret skills and spirit arts, they also have powerful body tempering techniques that are even above Glass Palace and Overlord Palace. This Zhan Feng's strength is definitely not below yours. Su Zimo secretly nodded. Lin Xuanji was right. Back at the bottom of the Dragon Burial Valley, the two of them had fought briefly. The outcome of their melee combat was that both of their knuckles were shattered and they suffered light injuries. Up till this point of Su Zimo's cultivation, Dean was the only person who could defend against and dispel the killing move of the mystic classic of the 12 demon kings of the Great Wilderness. But that was 10 years ago. 10 years ago, Su Zimo's Jin Dan had yet to be repaired. His inner core was not at perfected realm either. For the past 10 years, Su Zimo had never stopped drinking the spirit water in the backyard of the old temple. His body was tempered once more and became even more frightening. After entering the ancient battlefield, he was tempered by the lightning pool in the astral dragon's sputum lair and his inner core was already at perfected realm. If he channeled his Jin Dan and inner core at the same time, his blood qi would burst forth. Su Zimo believed that even Dean who had obtained the legacy of the human emperor would not be able to withstand the power contained within. Right then, Dean turned around slowly and looked at Su Zimo who was not far away. I'm going to let you achieve something. Among the paragons who left their names on the ancient phenomenon stele, you're going to be the fastest to die. Confidence. That was the confidence of being invincible for 100 years. A tremendous pressure surged over. When it arrived before Su Zimo, it dissipated silently into nothingness. Su Zimo had a calm expression and replied indifferently, that's what I had in mind as well. Dean scoffed in disdain and moved. Almost at the same time, Su Zimo leaped as well. The two of them arrived on the stone platform one after another. There's something I have to say in advance, suddenly, perfected Lord Honey said, this is the phenomenon ranking of the human race. I don't care if you're a demon or if you've cultivated a cultivation technique of the demon race, you're not allowed to use any demonic techniques here. As long as you dare to use any of them, I'll kill you. Perfected Lord Hun Yi's final sentence was filled with killing intent and chilling intent. Perfected Lord Yu Jun frowned slightly. With that, Su Zimo would be at a disadvantage in this battle. Without the means of the demon race, how long more could Su Zimo hold out against Di Yin? Perfected Lord Yu Jun wanted to say something but hesitated. Although he wanted to help, there was truly no way to refute Perfected Lord Hun Yi's words. After all, this was a fight for the phenomenon ranking. If someone were to release demonic techniques to fight for the phenomenon ranking, it would definitely attract criticism and go against the rules. Su Zimo, if you don't agree, we can call off this battle, Perfected Lord Yu Jun said in a deep voice. The reward for the second place of the phenomenon ranking is pretty decent as well. Su Zimo could tell that Perfected Lord Yu Jun was thinking for him. He was worried that Su Zimo would lose half his combat strength after losing his demonic techniques and would be killed by Di Yin on the stone platform without a chance to escape. Su Zimo, are you afraid? Are you trying to escape? Di Yin's eyes were filled with mockery. Escape? Su Zimo sneered and said slowly, even without using demonic techniques, I can still suppress you. Good. 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 Di Yin's eyes shone brightly as he nodded. Let's see how you're going to suppress me. Swash. Di Yin's figure flashed. Although he did not seem to use any strength, he had already arrived before Su Zimo in the blink of an eye. He closed the gap of more than 100 feet instantly at a frightening speed. Splash! The sound of blood flowing could be heard from within Di Yin's body like a tidal wave. Tidal blood. That was the highest realm of the power of bloodline. Even Glass Palace's Shibuya and Overlord Palace's Pangyu, who specialized in body tempering, had not reached this level. Swoosh! A gigantic fist approached and expanded gradually. A power as vast as the sea crushed over, as though it could destroy all living beings. The airflow in the void was compressed to its limits and turned incomparably scorching. He's attacking. So fast. It's a melee battle. A series of exclamations sounded from the crowd. All the cultivators knew that melee battles were the most dangerous. For paragons and monster incarnates of this level, melee battles only lasted for a split second. Life and death could be determined in a split second. All the cultivators widened their eyes and did not dare to blink, afraid that they might miss something. As for Little Fatty and the others, their bodies tensed instinctively with nervous expressions as well. It was unknown if Su Zimo could defend against Di Yin's terrifying attack without his demonic techniques. You're tuning in to the Blissful Bookshelf YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.